Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The radio picked it up before I saw anything. I was about halfway through the canyon, heading north, just trying to get home before it got too late. It was one of those narrow desert roads that cuts between rock walls on both sides. No streetlights, just your headlights and whatever's above you. My name's Ryan Mercer. I'd been out helping a friend move some equipment earlier that evening, and I took the canyon route back because it shaved about 20 minutes off the drive. It was already dark by the time I got in there. Not pitch black, but close. The kind where your headlights feel like they're barely reaching anything. The radio had been playing fine up until then. Just some local station, low volume. Then it cut out. No fade, no static at first, just silence. I glanced down at the display, thinking maybe I'd hit something by accident. Before I could touch it, a tone came through. Not loud, just there, a single note. Steady. It wasn't like normal interference. No crackling, no distortion. Just a clean, flat tone that sat right in the background. I turned the volume knob down. The tone stayed exactly the same. Didn't get quieter, didn't change. I turned it all the way down. Still there. That's when I noticed it wasn't coming from the speakers. It was just in the car. I looked around for a second, like I'd be able to pinpoint where it was coming from. I couldn't. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. Low enough that I could almost ignore it, but constant enough that I couldn't. I tapped the radio off completely. The display went dark. The tone didn't stop. I kept driving. The road curved slightly to the right, and the canyon walls closed in tighter for a stretch. That's when the tone changed. Not in pitch, in rhythm. It started pulsing. Same note, but now it faded in and out in a slow pattern. On, off. Each pulse lasting maybe a second. I felt this weird pressure in my chest when it pulsed. Not pain. Just a subtle shift, like the air inside the car changed for a split second each time. I checked the dashboard. Everything looked normal. Speed steady, engine fine, no warning lights. I told myself it was probably some kind of signal interference bouncing around the canyon. It made sense in a technical way, but it didn't feel like that. I rounded another bend, and that's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a reflection, a bright spot on the rock wall to my right, but it wasn't coming from my headlights. It was too high up. Too steady. I slowed down slightly, trying to get a better look. The tone in the car kept pulsing. On, off. The light moved. Not across the wall, out from it. It separated from the rock, like it had been sitting there the whole time and just pulled away. It hovered a few feet off the surface. Round, bright, but not blinding. More like a concentrated glow. No beam, no visible source, just a solid point of light. I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. The road was straight for a short stretch, and I kept moving forward. The light stayed in place for a second, then it started moving. Not toward me, alongside me. It drifted parallel to the road, matching my direction. I checked speed, about 45. The light kept pace. Exactly. I pressed the accelerator a little. 50, 55. The light sped up. No delay, no acceleration curve. Just matched me, perfectly. The tone in the car synced with something then. I don't know how to explain it. The pulsing felt timed with a movement, or maybe with me. I couldn't tell. I kept driving. The canyon walls blurred past on either side. The light stayed off to my right, maybe 20 or 30 feet away, hovering at about the same height as my car. It didn't bounce, didn't shake, just glided. I glanced over at it again. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape, more like a darker area shifting slightly within the glow. Then it was gone, back to uniform brightness. I looked ahead at the road, another bend coming up, tighter this time. I slowed down a bit. The light slowed with me, still matching, still silent. The tone in the car kept pulsing. On, off. I started to feel that same pressure in my chest again, stronger now. Not painful, just noticeable, like something was syncing with my breathing without my permission. I took the bend slowly. The light stayed with me, didn't drift away, didn't lag behind, just held its position relative to the car. I checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me, no other headlights, no signs of anyone else on the road. It was just me. And that thing. I reached over and tried the radio again. Turned it on. The display lit up. No station. Just blank. The tone didn't change. Still there. Still pulsing. I turned it off again. Didn't matter. The light moved slightly closer. Not much. Maybe a few feet. But enough that I noticed. I felt my stomach drop a little. I didn't speed up this time. Didn't slow down. Just held steady. The road straightened out again. The canyon walls pulled back slightly, giving a bit more open space on either side. The light drifted out a little farther from the car, still matching speed, still level. The tone in the car started to slow. The pulses stretched out. On. Longer pause. Off. Longer pause. On. I don't know how long it stayed like that. Could have been a minute. Could have been longer. Time felt off, like it wasn't moving the way it should. Then, without any build-up, the light moved upward. Not fast, just a smooth, vertical rise. It kept pace with the car for a second as it lifted, then it stopped matching me. I watched it through the side window as it climbed. The tone in the car stretched out one last time, a long, steady note. Then it cut off completely. The silence hit hard, like pressure releasing. The light kept rising, higher and higher until it reached the top edge of the canyon wall. For a second, it just hung there. Then it drifted sideways over the ridge, gone from view. I kept driving. Didn't stop, didn't turn around. Just stayed on the road until I was out of the canyon. The radio came back on by itself about 5 minutes later. Music picked up right where it had left off earlier. No static, no tone, nothing unusual. I checked the time on the dashboard. It was earlier than I expected, by about 10 minutes. I didn't try to figure that out. I just kept driving, but ever since then, whenever I go through that canyon, I keep the radio off and I watch the rock walls a little closer, waiting to see if that light ever pulls away from them again and falls into place beside me, like it knows exactly how fast I'm going. I noticed it about 10 minutes after we left the yard. At first, I thought it was just a reflection off the windshield or something catching on the glass, but it didn't behave like that. It held steady in one spot, no matter how the train moved. My name's Callum Briggs. I work as a rail technician, mostly night shifts, riding along on maintenance runs or freight routes to keep an eye on systems. That night, I was up in the cab with Darren, the driver. We were hauling a long freight line through a stretch of open countryside, nothing but flat fields and scattered trees for miles. It was just past 1 a.m., clear sky, no clouds, good visibility. I was leaning forward, checking a readout on the panel, when I caught the light out of the corner of my eye, above us, not directly overhead, but slightly forward and to the right. I straightened up and looked through the windshield. There it was, a single bright point, white, steady, not blinking like an aircraft, not moving across the sky like a satellite either, just sitting there. But we were moving, about 50 miles an hour, and the light stayed in the exact same relative position. I frowned, trying to figure out what I was looking at. Darren, you see that? I asked. He glanced up briefly, then back to the track. Star? He said. No, I said. It's not moving. He looked again, longer this time. The light held its position, same angle, same distance, at least as far as I could tell. Darren squinted a bit, then shrugged. Probably something lined up weird, he said. Happens sometimes. But it didn't feel like that. I've seen stars line up with movement before, where they seem to hang in place for a bit as you drive. But this was different. It wasn't drifting at all, not even slightly. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to get a clearer view. The light was sharper than a star, more defined and brighter. But it didn't cast any light onto anything. It didn't illuminate the cab or reflect off the rails. It just existed there. I checked my watch. 1:12 a.m. I remember that because I started timing it without really deciding to. We kept moving. The track ran straight for a long stretch, then curved slightly. The light didn't shift, didn't adjust. It just stayed locked in that same position relative to us. I sat back in my seat, watching it. Every few seconds, I'd glance at something else, the gauges, the track ahead, the side window, then back at the light. It never moved. I started trying to judge distance. That's where it got confusing. It didn't look close, but it didn't look far either. There was no depth to it, no way to tell how high up it was. It could have been a few hundred feet above us, or miles. I had no idea. Still there? Darren asked after a while. Yeah, I said. He shook his head slightly. All right, he muttered, more to himself than to me. The radio crackled for a second. Not unusual, just a quick burst of static. But the moment it happened, the light seemed to pulse, just once. A subtle change in brightness, then back to normal. I leaned forward again. "Did you see that?" I asked. Darren didn't answer right away. He was looking straight ahead, but I could tell he'd noticed something. "Yeah," he said finally. We both went quiet after that. The train kept moving. The countryside rolled past in the dark. The light stayed exactly where it had been. I checked my watch again, 1:26. 14 minutes. No change. I shifted in my seat, trying to see it from a different angle. I leaned slightly toward the side window. From there, it looked the same. Still above us. Still forward. Still fixed. I moved back to center. No difference. It didn't behave like something in the sky. It behaved like something attached to us. But it wasn't. There was nothing on the train that could produce that kind of light, and nothing that could sit out ahead like that. The radio crackled again, longer this time, a low, drawn-out hiss. The light pulsed again, slightly brighter this time, then settled. I felt this strange tightness in my chest. Not pain, just a sense that something wasn't right, like things were lining up in a way they shouldn't. I checked the instruments. Everything normal. Speed steady. No warnings, no anomalies. I looked back at the light. Still there, still matching us perfectly. "Try changing speed," I said. Darren glanced at me. "Why?" "Just try it." He hesitated for a second, then eased the throttle. The train slowed slightly. Not much, just a small drop. The light adjusted instantly, still in the same position. No lag, no acceleration, just matched. Darren let out a quiet breath. "All right," he said. "That's not normal." We sped back up. The light stayed with us. I checked my watch again. 1:41, almost half an hour. Still there. I started to notice something else then. The stars around it looked faint. Not gone. Just dimmer, like the light was affecting them somehow, even though it wasn't bright enough to wash them out. I blinked a few times, trying to focus. For a second, I thought I saw a shape around the light. Not a clear outline. Just a subtle difference in the sky. Like something was there, and the light was part of it. Then it was gone. Or maybe I just couldn't see it clearly anymore. The train moved into another long, straight section of track. Fields on both sides, no trees. Wide open. The light didn't change, didn't drift, didn't flicker, just stayed locked in place. I stopped checking my watch after a while. Time felt stretched, like it wasn't moving the way it should. We didn't talk much, just occasional glances at each other, then back at the light. After what felt like forever, but was probably close to an hour, I looked up again and it was gone. No fading, no movement away, just not there anymore. The sky was normal, stars in their usual places, nothing out of the ordinary. I leaned forward, scanning the sky. Nothing. I looked to the sides, behind us, everywhere I could see. Nothing. "Where'd it go?" Darren said quietly. I didn't answer. I checked my watch. 2:08 a.m. I tried to work it out in my head, from when I first saw it to now, just under an hour. I sat back in my seat, staring at the empty sky ahead. The radio crackled once more. Short, sharp, then silence. Everything else felt normal again. The train, the track, the night. But for that whole stretch, it had been there, holding that exact position like it was locked onto us, or we were locked onto it. And the moment it disappeared, it felt like something had just let go without ever showing what it actually was. I noticed the shadows before I noticed the light. I was already on edge because of the fog. It had rolled in fast, thicker than anything I'd driven through in a while. The kind where your headlights just bounce back at you and everything beyond a few feet turns into this blank gray wall. My name's Leah Carter. I was driving home from a late shift, cutting through a rural stretch to save time. I'd done it plenty of times before, but never in conditions like that. I had the headlights on full, fog lights too, crawling along at maybe 20 miles an hour. The road was empty. No other cars, no houses close enough to show any light, just that tight tunnel of visibility in front of me. I remember gripping the wheel a little tighter than usual, leaning forward trying to see past the fog. That's when I noticed the shadows. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks. The edges of the road, grass, small posts, even the faint outlines of trees, had shadows that didn't line up. Normally with headlights, everything stretches back in one direction, but these didn't. Some angled left, some angled right. Some looked like they were being cast straight down. It didn't make sense. I slowed down even more, almost to a crawl. I glanced at the dashboard, then back up. The shadows shifted slightly as I moved, but not in a consistent way. Like there were multiple light sources, but I only had my headlights. I remember feeling that slow, creeping confusion, the kind that builds when something simple stops behaving the way it should. I kept driving. The fog stayed just as thick. The shadows stayed wrong. Then the light appeared, not ahead of me, not behind, above. I didn't see it directly at first. I saw the change in brightness. The fog around the car seemed to glow faintly, like something was illuminating it from above. I glanced up through the windshield. At first, there was nothing but gray. Then, faintly, I saw it. A bright spot, directly over the car. Not a beam, not a shape I could define. Just a concentrated brightness in the fog. It didn't spread out like normal light. It stayed contained, like it had a boundary I couldn't see. The moment I noticed it, the shadows got worse, more pronounced, more scattered. Every surface around me had a different direction. The grass to the right cast one way, the center line of the road another. Even the inside of the car, my hands on the wheel, had faint, conflicting shadows. I slowed to a stop. Didn't even think about it. Just took my foot off the gas and let the car roll to a halt. The engine idled, the fog pressed in around me, the light stayed exactly above. I turned off the radio. I don't remember deciding to do it. I just did. The silence hit immediately. No music, no background noise. And then I realized there wasn't any outside sound either. No wind, no distant traffic, nothing. Just the engine. And even that sounded muted, like it was coming from farther away than it should have. I looked up again. The light hadn't moved. Still centered over the car. I couldn't see any structure. No outline, just that bright, contained glow. I reached up and turned off the headlights. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see it more clearly. The road went dark instantly, but the area around the car didn't. The fog still glowed faintly from above, and the shadows, they stayed, even without the headlights. That's what made my stomach drop a little. There shouldn't have been any shadows at all without a direct light source, but there they were, faint but visible, still pointing in different directions. I put my hand up in front of me, turned it slowly. I could see multiple outlines shifting across my fingers. Not sharp, but enough to notice. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it felt different in that moment, like everything external had been cut off. I thought about stepping out of the car, just to look straight up. But something about that idea felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just like I shouldn't. So I stayed where I was, hands on the wheel, eyes moving between the fog ahead and the brightness above. Then the engine flickered. Just for a second. A small dip in the sound, like it had almost stalled. The dashboard lights dimmed slightly, then came back. I tightened my grip. The car didn't shut off, but something definitely changed. I looked up again. The light seemed lower. Not by much, but closer than before. The glow in the fog was stronger now. I could see more detail in the air around me. Tiny particles moving, suspended. And for a second, just a second, I thought I saw something within the light. Not a shape I could describe. Just a darker area inside the brightness, like something was blocking part of it from within. I blinked. It was gone. Back to just the glow. The shadows shifted again. More erratic now. I felt that same pressure in my ears, like when you change altitude too quickly. I swallowed again, trying to clear it. Didn't help. The silence pressed in harder. Even the engine sound seemed thinner, like it was being pulled away. Then, without any transition, the light disappeared. Not faded, not moved, just gone. The fog dropped back to normal darkness. The shadows vanished completely. The engine sound snapped back to full. The usual background noise returned. I sat there for a few seconds, not moving. Then I turned the headlights back on. The beam cut through the fog again. Normal shadows, normal visibility, everything exactly as it should have been. I eased my foot back onto the gas and started driving again. Slow at first, then a little faster once I got my bearings. I checked the mirrors. Nothing behind me, nothing above that I could see through the fog. The rest of the drive was uneventful. No more lights, no more strange shadows. But every time I passed something on the side of the road, a post, a tree, a sign, I found myself watching the shadow it cast, just to make sure it pointed in the right direction, and that there was only one of them, like there was supposed to be. I noticed it in the water before I noticed anything else. I'd been standing there a while, maybe 40 minutes, just casting and letting the line sit. It was late, close to midnight, and the lake was completely still. No wind, no boats, nothing moving out there. My name's Connor Hale. I'd driven out to this spot a few miles past the main access road, where the shoreline curves in and the trees block most of the highway noise. It's the kind of place where you can actually hear yourself think. The water was calm enough that it looked almost like glass. That's why the reflection stood out. At first, I thought it was just a star. There were plenty of them overhead, and they all reflected faintly on the surface. But this one was brighter, sharper. I saw it just off to the right of where my line was sitting. A single point of light in the water, clear enough that it looked like it was sitting just beneath the surface. I shifted my stance slightly, trying to get a better look. The reflection didn't ripple or distort like the others. It stayed solid, perfectly still. I frowned and looked up. The sky above that spot was empty. No bright star, no plane, nothing at all. I blinked a couple of times, thinking maybe I'd lost it or just misjudged the angle. Then I looked back down. Still there, same spot in the water. Same brightness. That's when I felt that first bit of unease. It didn't make sense. If something's reflecting, it has to come from somewhere. I stepped closer to the edge, careful not to slip on the rocks. The water barely moved under me. The reflection stayed locked in place. I leaned forward slightly, peering into it. It didn't look like it was on the surface. It looked deeper, like it was coming from somewhere below. But the water there wasn't that deep, maybe 6, 7 feet at most. I shifted again, trying to change the angle. The reflection didn't move, it didn't stretch or bend, it just stayed there. I looked up again, scanning the sky more carefully this time. Nothing. Stars scattered across the sky, but none that matched what I was seeing below. No blinking lights, no aircraft, no clouds to reflect anything. Just empty space. I checked behind me, thinking maybe there was a light source from the shore. My truck was parked about 30 yards back, headlights off. No other cars, no buildings, nothing that could be casting light onto the water. I turned back. The reflection was still there, unchanged. I crouched down a bit, bringing my eyes closer to the level of the surface. The light seemed slightly larger from that angle. Not by much, just enough to notice. I reached out slowly, dipping my fingers into the water a few feet away from it. The ripples spread outward. They hit the reflection and passed through it. No distortion, no break in the light. It stayed intact. That made my stomach tighten a little. I pulled my hand back out, water dripping off my fingers. The surface settled again. The reflection stayed exactly the same. I straightened up, looking around again. Still no sound, no wind, no movement, just me and that point of light in the water. I checked the time on my phone. 12:07 a.m. I don't know why, but I felt like I should remember that. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked down again. The light hadn't changed. It didn't flicker, didn't dim, didn't brighten, just steady. I picked up my rod, reeled in the line a bit so the hook wasn't sitting near it anymore. For some reason, I didn't like the idea of anything being in the water close to it. I took a step back from the edge, then another. The reflection didn't follow me. It stayed where it was. I looked up again, slower this time, tracing the exact vertical line from the water to the sky. Nothing, just empty air. That's when I noticed something else. The stars around that part of the sky looked thinner, not gone, just slightly dimmer, like something was affecting them, but not blocking them completely. I squinted, trying to focus. There might have been a shape there, faint, hard to define, like a patch of sky that didn't quite match the rest. I blinked again. It was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. I looked back down at the water. The reflection was still there, unchanged. I felt that creeping sense of being watched then. Not strong, not overwhelming, just a quiet awareness that I wasn't alone out there, even though I couldn't see anyone else. I shifted my weight, glancing over my shoulder again. Nothing. Just trees and darkness. I turned back and the light in the water moved. Just slightly. Maybe a foot to the left. Smooth. Slow, I froze. It hadn't moved before. Not once. I watched it carefully. It held there for a second. Then it drifted again. Same slow pace, no ripples, no disturbance, just the light sliding through the water like it wasn't interacting with it at all. I took another step back. The distance between me and the shoreline increased. The reflection kept moving, parallel to the shore now, still beneath the surface, still steady. I felt my heart rate pick up, not panic, just a growing tension. I didn't understand what I was looking at, and the fact that it was moving now made it worse. It drifted for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped, held there, perfectly still again. I didn't move, didn't breathe any deeper than I had to. I just watched it. Then I looked up one more time at the same spot in the sky, still nothing, and when I looked back down, it was gone. No fading, no dimming, just gone. The water was empty, dark, reflecting only the stars that actually belonged there. I stood there for a long time after that, scanning the surface, looking up and down, back and forth. Nothing came back. Eventually, I packed up my gear, walked back to the truck, started the engine. The headlights swept across the water as I turned. There was nothing there, just a calm, empty surface. But the whole drive home, I kept thinking about that reflection and how it had no source, and how, for a few minutes, it felt like something was there, just out of sight, showing up only where I wasn't looking directly at it. I noticed the lights first. I was halfway down the street with my dog, a black lab named Murphy, just doing the usual late-night walk. It was one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where everything looks the same. Driveways, trimmed hedges, porch lights left on overnight. It was cold, but not freezing. Clear sky. You could actually see stars, which isn't always the case where I live. Murphy was ahead of me, nose down, doing his thing, that when every outdoor light on the street dimmed at the same time. Not off, just dipped. Like someone turned a dial down for a second. Porch lights, street lamps, even the glow from inside some of the houses, it all faded just slightly. Then it came back. It happened fast enough that I almost thought I imagined it. I stopped walking. Murphy didn't. He kept going until the leash pulled tight, and he looked back at me, confused. I stood there for a second, scanning the street. Everything looked normal again. Lights steady, no flickering, no sound. I remember thinking it might have been a power fluctuation or something. Then it happened again. Same thing, a quick dip in brightness, softer this time, or maybe I was just paying more attention. I looked up without really thinking about it. That's when I saw the shape. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. It wasn't bright, it wasn't glowing. It was just darker than the sky. A faint triangular outline, barely visible because it blocked out the stars behind it. Huge. That was the first thing that hit me once my eyes adjusted. It stretched across a big section of the sky, not sharp-edged like a perfect triangle, but defined enough that you could trace it. 3 points, slowly moving. I felt this weird hesitation, like my brain didn't want to fully process it. I blinked a couple times, trying to refocus. The shape didn't disappear. It kept drifting. No sound, no blinking lights. Nothing that looked like an aircraft. Just a massive, dark form sliding across the stars. Murphy started acting different then. He stopped pulling forward and stood next to me, ears up, staring in the same direction I was. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood there, completely still. I looked around again, half expecting someone else to be outside, noticing it. But the street was empty. No cars, no people, just houses with their lights on like nothing was happening. I looked back up. The triangle had moved slightly, enough that I could see where stars had been and were now visible again behind it. It wasn't fast, not slow either, just steady. I tried to judge how high it was, but there was nothing to compare it to. It didn't feel close, but it didn't feel distant either. That was the part that didn't sit right. I couldn't place it. I pulled my phone out, thinking I should record it. As soon as I unlocked the screen, it froze. Not completely. The display stayed on, but nothing responded. I tapped the screen a few times. Nothing. I looked back up at the sky. The shape was still there, still moving. I lowered the phone and tried again. Same thing. Frozen. Murphy shifted next to me, letting out a low whine. Not loud, just enough that I noticed. I reached down and put a hand on his back. He felt tense, like he was waiting for something. The lights dimmed again. Longer this time, not just a quick dip. They stayed low for maybe 3 or 4 seconds. The whole street looked flatter, like the light had been drained out of it. I could still see everything, but it felt off. During that time, the triangle seemed clearer. Not brighter, just easier to make out. I could see the edges more distinctly, still no lights on it, still silent. The moment the lights came back to normal, the shape became harder to see again. like it blended back into the sky. I looked down at my phone. It was working again, like nothing had happened. I opened the camera, pointed it up. The screen showed a normal sky, stars, nothing else. I lowered it, looked with my own eyes. The shape was still there. I raised the phone again. Nothing, just stars. I felt this slow, creeping unease build in my chest. Not panic, just that sense that something wasn't lining up. I turned slightly, trying to follow its movement. It passed over part of the neighborhood, still blocking stars as it went. No sound at all, no engine noise, no wind disturbance, nothing. Murphy pressed closer to my leg. I didn't even realize he'd moved until I felt him against me. I kept watching. It took maybe a minute, maybe longer, to cross the visible part of the sky. Time felt off, like it was stretching. As the back edge of the triangle passed, the stars returned behind it. Perfectly normal, no distortion, no trail, just gone. I stood there for a while after it disappeared, looking at the empty sky, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. Murphy relaxed a little, but he stayed close. I glanced down the street again. Everything looked normal. Lights steady, no flickering, no signs anything had happened. I checked my phone. The time said 11:18 p.m. I could have sworn it was closer to 11:30, but I didn't know for sure. I started walking again, slower this time. Murphy stayed right next to me instead of pulling ahead. Every now and then, I'd glance back up at the sky. Nothing, just stars. When I got home, I checked the security camera over my driveway. The footage showed me walking past with Murphy. Same time, same direction. But there was no dimming in the lights, no change in brightness. Everything stayed consistent. And when I paused the frame where I remembered looking up, the sky above me was completely clear. No outline, no shape, just empty sky. But I knew exactly where it had been. Right above the street, moving slow enough that I could follow it. Big enough that it didn't make sense. And quiet enough that the only thing I could hear was Murphy breathing next to me and the sound of my own footsteps while something passed overhead that didn't show up anywhere except when I looked at it directly. I noticed it around mile marker 42, and it never got any closer after that. My name's Eli Garner. I'd been driving most of the night, hauling a refrigerated load up through a stretch of highway that cuts between farmland and long, flat fields. It was one of those routes where you can go 20, 30 miles without seeing much besides the road and whatever your headlights pick up. It was just after 1 a.m., cold, clear. No fog, no rain, sky full of stars. I had the radio on low, just enough to keep me awake, and I was watching the markers tick by like I always do. 41. Then 42. That's when I saw the light. Off to the right, out past the shoulder, maybe a few hundred yards into one of the fields. Bright, not blinding, but noticeable. White, steady, not flashing. At first I figured it was a farm light, maybe someone working late or a piece of equipment parked out there. Didn't think much of it. But as I kept driving, something about it stuck. It didn't shift the way it should have. Normally, if you're passing something off to the side, it changes angle, moves across your field of view, gets bigger, then smaller. This didn't. It stayed in the same spot relative to me. I passed mile marker 43. The light looked exactly the same size, same brightness, same position. I frowned a little, leaned forward in my seat, checked the mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me, no cars, no other trucks. Just empty highway. I looked back at the light. Still there. Still not moving. I kept driving. 45. Each marker passed, and every time I checked, it looked like I hadn't gotten any closer to it at all. That's when it started to feel off. I've driven long enough to know how distance works on open roads. Even if something's far out, you see some kind of change. Perspective shifts, angles adjust. This didn't. It was like it was locked in place. I turned down the radio a bit, just so I could focus. The engine hum filled the cab, steady and familiar. Everything else felt normal, except that light. I checked the speedometer. 55, right where I'd been holding it. I wasn't slowing down, wasn't drifting. Everything about the drive was consistent, except that. Mile marker 46 came up. I watched it pass under the headlights, looked back out to the field. Same light, same distance. I remember thinking maybe it was farther away than I thought. Maybe it was something near the horizon and I was just misjudging it. But it didn't look distant, it looked placed, like it belonged to the field itself. I adjusted my grip on the wheel. My hands felt a little tense without me realizing it. I shifted slightly in my seat. The light didn't react, didn't flicker, didn't move, just hung there. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 1:12, then back to the road, mile marker 47. Still there. At that point, I started doing the math in my head. If I'd passed 5 miles and it hadn't changed, something wasn't lining up. Either I wasn't actually moving the way I thought I was, or it wasn't where I thought it was. I checked the GPS. Signal was fine, route steady, speed consistent, everything normal. I looked back out again. The light seemed slightly higher now, not by much, but enough that I noticed, or maybe the road had dipped. Hard to tell. I kept driving. 48, 49. Still no change in size, no change in brightness, just that same fixed point in the field. I noticed then that the ground around it wasn't lit up, not the way it should have been. If something that bright was sitting in a field, you'd expect to see the grass illuminated, maybe a glow spreading outward. There was nothing. The field stayed dark. The light just existed, separate from everything else. I swallowed, my mouth dry. The highway felt quieter than usual. No passing cars, no distant headlights, just me and that light. Mile marker 50. I remember that one clearly. Big reflective sign on the side. Caught it in the headlights, watched it pass. Looked back out. Same light, same distance. At that point, I eased off the gas a little. Not enough to slow down drastically, just enough to test something. The engine tone dropped slightly. The truck coasted. The light didn't change, didn't drift closer, didn't fall behind. It stayed exactly where it had been. I pressed the gas again, bringing it back up to speed. Still nothing. No change. I felt that creeping unease settle in, the kind that builds slowly when something simple stops making sense. I checked the mirrors again. Still nothing behind me. I looked back out, and for a second, just a second, I thought I saw something between me and the light. Not a solid object, more like a distortion, like heat rising off asphalt. Except the air was cold, the shape moved slightly. Or maybe I did. Then it was gone. I blinked, trying to refocus. The light was still there, unchanged. I tightened my grip on the wheel. My heart rate had picked up a bit. I could feel it in my chest, steady, but faster. Mile marker 51, still there. I remember thinking I should pull over, just stop and look at it from a standstill. But the idea didn't sit right. Something about being out there, alone, with that thing in the field. I didn't want to be outside the truck, so I kept driving. 52, 53. Then, without any warning, it disappeared. No movement, no fading, no change in brightness, just gone. The field was empty, dark, normal. I stared at the spot where it had been. Nothing. No afterimage. No sign of anything at all. I checked the mirrors again. Still empty road. I looked back at the dashboard clock. 1:14. 2 minutes. That's all that had passed since I first noticed it. It felt longer. I don't know how much longer, but not 2 minutes. I drove on for another 10 miles before I saw any other headlights. Normal traffic, normal movement, everything back to how it should be. But I kept checking the side of the road, every field I passed, every dark stretch, half expecting that light to be there again, sitting at the same distance, no matter how far I drove. I noticed the window before I even fully woke up. Something about the light in the room felt off. Not brighter, not darker, just different. Like it had been filtered through something. I was still lying there, half asleep, staring toward the wall, when I realized I could hear my own breathing too clearly. No cars outside, no wind, no usual background noise, just me. That's what made me turn my head toward the window. The entire pane was fogged over, not the inside, the outside. Condensation thick enough that it looked almost white in places, like frost but wetter. That part alone didn't make sense. It wasn't cold enough for that, and it definitely hadn't been humid when I went to bed. I pushed myself up on one elbow, trying to get a better look. That's when I saw the clear patch, right in the center of the window, perfectly oval, not wiped away like someone dragged a hand across it, not streaked, just clear, like the condensation had never formed there at all. I sat up fully then. My name's Darren Pike. I live in a small house on the edge of a wooded area. Nothing isolated, but not packed in either. My bedroom window faces the backyard, which backs up to a line of trees. I remember looking at that oval spot and thinking it looked wrong. Not just because it was clear, because of the shape. It wasn't random. It was centered at about head height, if someone had been standing outside. and it was just big enough that you could imagine something looking through it. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up slowly. The floor creaked under me. That sound felt louder than it should have. I stepped closer to the window. The rest of the glass was still covered in that thin layer of moisture, tiny droplets clinging evenly across the surface, except for that one spot. I leaned in close enough that I could see into the yard. It was still dark out. Early morning, just before sunrise. The trees were barely visible shapes against the sky. Nothing moving. No one out there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd interrupted something. Like I hadn't just woken up on my own. Like something had already been there. I reached out and touched the glass near the edge of the clear patch. Cold. Colder than it should have been. The kind of cold that sinks into your fingertip. I moved my hand toward the center of the clear area. The temperature didn't change. Still cold, but there was no moisture, no film, nothing. Just dry glass. I pressed my palm flat against it, half expecting something on the other side to respond. Nothing did. I stood there like that for a few seconds, just listening. Still no sound. No birds, no distant traffic, nothing. I pulled my hand back and wiped a small section of the fogged glass with my sleeve. It smeared immediately, left streaks. Nothing like the clean, untouched patch in the center. I stepped back a bit, trying to see the whole thing at once. The oval looked even more defined from a distance, almost like it had a boundary. Not a hard line, but enough that your eye could follow it. I glanced down at the ground outside. The grass near the window looked darker than the rest of the yard, like it was damp, but everything else was dry. I leaned closer again, squinting. For a second, I thought I saw something in the reflection. Not outside, on the glass itself. A faint distortion, like the shape of something that had been pressed close to it. I blinked. It was gone, just the clear patch and the fog around it. I turned and grabbed my phone off the nightstand. The screen lit up. 4:12 a.m., earlier than I usually wake up. I went back to the window and took a picture. The camera picked it up. The oval was visible in the photo, clear as it was in real life. I zoomed in on the image. The edges looked too smooth, too even. Like it wasn't just a gap in condensation, like something had defined that space. I lowered the phone and looked outside again. The sky was starting to lighten slightly, just enough that I could make out more detail in the yard. Still nothing there. No movement, no sign that anything had been near the window, but the grass right below it still looked darker. I unlocked the back door and stepped outside. The air hit me immediately. Cold, colder than inside. I walked over to the spot beneath the window. The grass was damp, not soaked, just enough that it clung slightly to my shoes. I crouched down and touched it. Cool. Normal. I looked for footprints. There weren't any. Not that I could see. Just flattened blades of grass in a rough oval shape directly below the window, like something had been standing there, or hovering just above it. I straightened up slowly and looked back at the glass from outside. The oval was still there, clear against the fogged surface. From this angle, it lined up exactly with where my head would be if I were standing there. Looking in, I felt that slow, creeping unease settle in again. Not panic, just the realization that something about this didn't line up with anything normal. I stepped back, giving myself some distance. The rest of the house looked quiet. No lights on, no movement. I went back inside and closed the door. Locked it. When I returned to the bedroom, the window looked exactly the same. Condensation everywhere except that one spot. I stood there for a while just watching it, waiting for something to change. It didn't. Eventually, as the sun came up, the condensation started to fade. Slowly at first, then faster as the glass warmed. Within maybe 20 minutes, the entire window was clear again. No trace of the oval, no streaks, no marks, just normal glass. If I hadn't taken the photo, I would have thought I imagined it. But the picture's still on my phone. And every now and then when I wake up earlier than usual, I find myself looking at that window first, before anything else, just to see if that clear patch shows up again, exactly where something would need it, if it was standing there, quiet, close, watching in. I didn't notice it until I got home. The shoot itself felt normal. That's the part that keeps bothering me. My name's Elise Warren. I do freelance photography, mostly landscapes and long exposure night shots. That night I'd driven out to this overlook about 20 minutes outside town. It's just a gravel turnout above a wide valley. Nothing special during the day, but at night you can see the whole sky without much light pollution. It was cold, clear, no wind. Perfect conditions. I got there around 11:30 p.m., set up my tripod, checked my framing. The valley stretched out below me, dark and flat, with a few scattered lights from distant houses. Above that, just a clean sky full of stars. I took a few test shots first, short exposures, just to dial in focus and composition. Everything looked normal. Stars sharp, no weird artifacts. Then I started the long exposures, 30 seconds each. I took maybe 15 or 20 shots over the next half hour. Same framing, barely moved the camera. Just small adjustments to exposure settings here and there. Nothing unusual happened while I was out there. No strange lights, no sounds, no planes passing overhead. I remember that clearly because I always watch for that kind of thing. It can ruin a shot. At one point, I even stood there for a few minutes between shots, just looking up, letting my eyes adjust fully. The sky looked completely normal. Eventually, around 12:15, I packed up and headed home. The whole drive back felt uneventful. Quiet roads, no traffic. I got in, dropped my gear by the door, and went straight to my laptop. I always check the shots right away. It's kind of a habit. I loaded the files and started flipping through them one by one. First few looked good. Stars crisp, no blur. Then I hit the 6th or 7th image. That's where I stopped. There was something in the sky. At first, I thought it was a smudge on the lens. It was a dark circle, perfectly round, sitting just above the horizon line in the frame. Not a shadow, not a gradient, a solid, clean-edged circle, blocking out the stars behind it. I leaned closer to the screen. The edges were too sharp to be anything like dust or dirt, and it wasn't faint. It was darker than the surrounding sky, like something had been cut out of the image. I flipped to the photo before it. Nothing. Same exact framing, same section of sky, completely clear. I flipped forward to the next one. Nothing there either, just stars. I went back to the image with the circle. It was centered slightly off to the right, maybe a third of the way up from the horizon. I zoomed in. The stars disappeared cleanly at the edge of the circle. No distortion, no blurring, just gone. Like something had been placed between the camera and the sky. I checked the metadata, same settings as the others, same exposure time, no difference. I leaned back in my chair, trying to think of what could cause that. A bird maybe? But it didn't make sense. A bird would blur during a 30-second exposure. This was sharp, perfectly still, and perfectly circular. I flipped through the rest of the shots again. Nothing like it anywhere else, just that one frame. I went back to the original file, opened it in a different program, same result. The circle was still there. I checked for any editing artifacts. Nothing. This was straight from the camera. That's when I started thinking back to the actual shoot, trying to remember if I had seen anything. Anything at all. I couldn't. No lights, no movement, nothing crossing the sky. I remember the silence more than anything. It was one of those nights where everything feels still, even the air. I got up and walked over to my gear, still sitting by the door. I pulled the camera out, checked the lens. Clean. No smudges, no marks, nothing that could explain what I saw in the photo. I went back to the computer and stared at the image again. The longer I looked at it, the more off it felt. It wasn't just that the circle was there, it was how exact it was. No variation in the edge, no irregularities, just a perfect, smooth boundary. I zoomed in further, pixel by pixel. The stars stopped abruptly at the edge, no fading, no transition, just a hard cutoff. I checked the time on that image, 11:58 p.m. I tried to match it to what I remembered doing around that time. I'd been standing near the tripod, adjusting something on the camera. I might have looked up briefly, but I didn't remember seeing anything in that part of the sky. That's what didn't sit right. If something that size had been there even for a second, I should have noticed it. I flipped back and forth between the images again. Before, nothing. After, nothing. Just that one frame. I sat there for a long time. I sat just staring at it. Eventually, I noticed something else. It was subtle. At the very edge of the circle, there was a faint difference in brightness. Not inside the circle. Inside was just black, but right along the border, like the air around it had been slightly distorted. I zoomed out again. From a distance, it almost looked like the sky had been pressed inward. I don't know how else to describe it. I checked the rest of the image. The valley below looked normal. The lights from the houses were steady, no blur, no movement, just the sky that had that one missing piece. I closed the file and reopened it. Same thing. I even restarted my computer at one point just to rule out any weird glitch. Didn't change anything. The circle was still there, right where it had been. I haven't been back to that overlook since. I still go out shooting at night, just not there. Every time I review my photos now, I check the sky first. I haven't seen anything like it again. But sometimes, when I'm out there setting up, I catch myself looking at the same spot in the sky, the way it looked in that image, and wondering if there was something there the whole time, just sitting still, only showing up in that one frame and nowhere else. The power went out all at once. No flicker, no warning. 1 second, the whole office park was lit. Parking lot lamps, lobby lights, everything. And the next, it was completely dark. I was sitting in the security booth at the front gate when it happened. My name's Adrian Cole. I work nights at a small business complex just outside town. Nothing high security, just a cluster of low-rise office buildings, a couple warehouses, and a parking structure. When the lights went out, the monitors in front of me blinked off too. The backup system should have kicked in right away. It didn't. I sat there for a second, staring at my own reflection in the dead screens. Then I reached for the radio. "Control to maintenance," I said, even though I knew nobody was there at that hour. No response. The booth felt darker than it should have been. Not just because the lights were out. More like the usual background glow from the buildings was gone. I pushed my chair back and stepped outside. The night air hit me right away. Cool still, no wind. The entire complex was black. No emergency lights, no exit signs glowing, nothing. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. No hum from the HVAC units, no distant buzz from transformers. Even the faint background noise from the highway seemed muted. I stood there, letting my eyes adjust. That's when I saw it, out over the center of the office park, above the main parking lot. A light. Round. Not huge, but big enough that it didn't look like a star or anything distant. It was maybe 2 or 3 stories up, just hovering. White, but not harsh, more like a soft, even glow. It didn't cast light onto the ground. The pavement below it stayed dark, but the air around it looked different, like it was slightly brighter in that one spot. I took a few steps forward without thinking. The gravel under my shoes sounded louder than it should have, or maybe everything else was just too quiet. I stopped near the edge of the lot. The sphere didn't move, didn't flicker, didn't change brightness. It just hung there, perfectly still. I glanced back at the buildings, still no lights, no signs of power coming back. I pulled my phone out, no signal. That wasn't unusual for that area, but it still added to the feeling. I looked back at the sphere. It seemed closer now, not like it had moved, just like I was seeing it more clearly. The surface of it wasn't solid. It looked almost layered, like there was depth inside the light. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus. For a second, I thought I saw something shift inside it. Not a shape, just a darker patch moving slowly. Then it was gone, back to a uniform glow. I checked my watch, 2:41 a.m. I remember that clearly. I don't know why, I just do. I stood there watching it, waiting for it to do something, anything. It didn't. Minutes passed. I know because I kept checking my watch. 2:47. Still there. Still not moving. The silence stayed constant. No wind, no distant noise, just that heavy, empty quiet. I tried the radio again. Still nothing. The sphere didn't react, didn't acknowledge anything. It just existed. I walked a little closer into the lot. The distance between us closed slightly, but the sphere didn't seem to change size. It didn't feel like I was getting closer to it. More like it was maintaining the same distance, no matter where I stood. That's when I noticed something else. There were no shadows. Even though there was light, faint as it was, nothing around me cast a shadow. The cars in the lot, the light poles, even my own body. Nothing. Everything just sat there, evenly dim. I shifted my stance, turning slightly. Still nothing. No change. I looked back up. The sphere was exactly where it had been. I felt that slow tension building in my chest. Not fear, exactly. More like confusion that kept getting deeper the longer I stood there. I checked my watch again, 2:52. It had been over 10 minutes. The sphere hadn't moved once. I started to wonder if it ever would. Then, without any sudden change, it began to drift. Upward. Slow, steady, no acceleration, no sound. Just a gradual rise. I watched it carefully. It didn't tilt or shift, didn't rotate, just moved straight up, the same speed the whole time. As it rose, it didn't get smaller the way something distant would. It just stayed the same until it reached a certain point. Then it started to fade. Not quickly, not all at once, just a slow dimming. The edges softened first, then the center. I took a step forward like that would help me keep it in view. It didn't. The light kept fading until it was barely visible, and then it was gone. The sky above the office park was empty again. Dark. Normal. At the exact moment it disappeared, the power came back. All at once. Lights snapped on across the buildings. The parking lot lamps flickered to life. The hum of the systems returned. The noise of the world rushed back in. I stood there for a second, blinking in the sudden brightness. Everything looked the same as it always did. Like nothing had happened. I looked down at my watch, 2:56. 15 minutes. That's how long it had been there. I walked back to the booth slowly. The monitors inside were booting back up. The cameras came online one by one. I checked the feeds. The recording jumped from 240 to 255. No footage in between, nothing captured, just a clean gap. I sat down, staring at the screens. Everything was back to normal. Cars sitting where they had been, empty lot, no sign of anything above it. But I kept thinking about how still it had been, how quiet everything felt, and how, for those 15 minutes, it seemed like the entire place had just paused while that light hung over it, waiting, before drifting away like it had never been there at all. I noticed it because the alley looked brighter than it should have. It was just after 11:30 at night, and I'd taken the trash out like I always did before heading to bed. Nothing unusual about it. Same routine. Grab the bags, walk them out behind the row of houses, toss them in the bin, head back in. My name's Kyle Mercer. I live in a pretty normal suburban neighborhood. Tight houses, shared fences, narrow back lanes, the kind of place where there's always some light somewhere. Porch lights, windows, street lamps, bleeding in from the front. But the alley behind my house is usually darker. That night, it wasn't. I stepped out the back door and immediately noticed it. The ground, the fence, even the side of the garage, it all looked faintly lit. Not bright, just lifted, like the contrast had been turned down. I remember pausing halfway down the steps, just looking around. At first I thought maybe someone had installed a new light nearby, one of those motion floodlights, but there weren't any new fixtures. No harsh beam, no clear direction to the light. It was just there, even, soft. I walked down the rest of the way, trash bags in hand, trying to figure out where it was coming from. That's when I looked up and saw it. It was sitting above the houses across the alley, not high up in the sky, low enough that it didn't feel distant. It was maybe the size of a small car, hard to judge exactly because there was no clear edge to it, just a glowing shape. White, but not harsh, more like a steady, diffused light. It didn't blink, didn't flicker, didn't move, just hung there. I stopped walking, just stood there in the middle of the alley, holding the trash, staring at it. My first thought was drone, but it didn't make any noise. No buzzing, no rotor sound, nothing. The air was completely still. I shifted my weight slightly, trying to get a better angle. The object didn't change, didn't react. It just stayed in place, hovering above the rooftops. I glanced around instinctively. Windows in the neighboring houses were lit. A TV flickering in one, someone moving behind curtains in another. Normal activity, nobody looking up, nobody reacting. I turned in a slow circle, expecting to see someone else noticing it. Nothing, just quiet houses and the faint hum of distant traffic. I looked back at the object. Still there, unmoving. The light it gave off didn't seem to spread the way normal light would. The roofs beneath it weren't lit up, the trees weren't casting clear shadows, but everything still looked brighter than it should have been. I walked a few steps forward toward the bins at the end of the alley. The angle shifted slightly. The object stayed centered above the same point, like it was fixed in place. I felt that slow, creeping unease building. Not panic, just that feeling that something wasn't right. I tossed the trash into the bin without taking my eyes off it. The lid slammed shut louder than I expected. The sound seemed dull, like it didn't carry as far as it should have. I noticed then that I couldn't hear anything else. No insects, no wind, no distant cars, just silence. The kind that feels heavy. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I took a step back, still looking up. The object hadn't moved. I raised my hand slightly, shielding my eyes, trying to see if I could make out any detail. There was something inside the light, not clearly defined, just a darker area, like a shape within it. But every time I tried to focus on it, it seemed to shift or blur. I blinked a few times, trying to clear my vision. Still there, still hovering, still silent. I thought about going inside, just turning around and walking back in like nothing was happening, but I couldn't stop looking at it. It didn't feel like it was just part of the sky. It felt placed, like it was exactly where it intended to be. I took another step back, then another. The distance between me and it didn't seem to change anything. It stayed the same size, same brightness, same position. I checked the houses again, still no reaction from anyone. No doors opening, no voices, nothing. That's when I noticed something else. The shadows. They didn't line up. The fence behind me cast one way, the bin cast another. Even my own shadow looked split, faint outlines stretching in slightly different directions. I froze. The light above didn't shift, but the shadows around me felt wrong. I slowly turned my head, looking at the ground, then back up again. The object was still there, exactly the same. I don't know how long I stood there. It couldn't have been more than a minute or two, but it felt longer, like time had stretched slightly. Then I looked away, just for a second. I don't even remember why. Maybe I glanced toward the back door, maybe I checked the ground again. But the moment I broke eye contact, it was gone. I looked back up immediately. Nothing, just the night sky, dark, normal, no glow, no shape, no light at all. The alley dropped back into its usual dimness. The shadows snapped back to normal, and the sounds, they came back all at once. Distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere, a faint rustle of leaves. I stood there, staring at the empty sky, trying to figure out where it had gone. There was no movement, no fading, no transition. It was just there, and then it wasn't. I stayed out there a little longer, scanning the rooftops, the sky, the edges of the houses. Nothing came back. Eventually, I turned and walked back to the door. Before I went inside, I glanced back one more time. Everything looked exactly the way it always did. But for a second, I had the strong feeling that if I looked up again, it might be there, in the exact same spot, just waiting for me to notice it again. I saw the light before I heard anything, and that was the first thing that felt wrong, because there wasn't any sound at all. My name's Travis Boone. I was about 6 miles into state forest land, way past the marked trails, in a spot I'd used a few times during deer season. It was late November, just before sunrise, cold enough that your breath hung in the air for a second before disappearing. I'd been sitting in a blind I'd set up between 2 old pines, like overlooking a narrow game path that cut through the trees. Nothing fancy, just some camo netting and a folding stool. I got there around 4:45 a.m., settled in, and planned to wait it out until first light. It was quiet the way woods get quiet before dawn. Not silent, but close. A few distant rustles, maybe a branch shifting somewhere, the occasional soft movement of leaves. Enough to remind you things were out there, but nothing close. I'd been there maybe 20 minutes when I noticed something off to my left. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. A faint brightness between the trees. I blinked a few times, trying to clear it. It didn't go away. I leaned forward slightly, careful not to make noise, and looked through the gap in the netting. There was a light. Not high up, not low on the ground either. Just suspended, maybe 10 feet up, hard to judge exactly through the trees. It wasn't bright like a flashlight, more like a soft, steady glow. White, but not harsh. I remember thinking it looked almost contained, like the light didn't spill outward the way it should. I stayed completely still, watching it. My first thought was someone else out there, another hunter. Maybe they had a headlamp on, but there was no beam, no movement that matched a person walking, and no sound. That's what stood out the most. If someone had been moving through the woods, I would have heard something. Branches snapping, leaves crunching, breathing, anything. But there was nothing, just that light. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to get a better angle. The light didn't react, didn't flicker, didn't change brightness, it just hung there. Then it moved. Not fast, not sudden, just a slow, steady drift between the trees. It didn't dip or rise, didn't follow the terrain. It stayed at the same height, sliding sideways like it was on a track. I felt that slow tension build in my chest. I watched it pass behind one tree, then another. Each time I expected to see shadows shift around it, but they didn't. That's when it really started to bother me. The trees around it didn't change, no shadows stretching or shifting, no light hitting the trunks or the ground. It was like the glow existed on its own, separate from everything else. I raised my rifle slightly, not aiming, just holding it closer. Not because I thought I'd need it, more out of habit. The light kept moving, slow, steady, no sound. I checked the time on my watch, 5:12, still early enough that the sky hadn't started to lighten yet. I looked back at the light. It had moved maybe 20 feet from where I first saw it. Still the same brightness, same shape, no visible source. I remember thinking it should have been lighting up the mist. It was cold enough for a light fog to hang low in the trees. But the glow didn't catch it, didn't reflect off anything. It just existed. I shifted again, leaning a little to the right this time. The movement felt loud, even though I barely made any noise. The light didn't react, didn't turn, didn't pause. It just kept drifting. I stayed like that, barely breathing, watching it. Minutes passed. I know because I kept checking my watch. 5:15, 5:17, 5:19. It moved the whole time, never speeding up, never slowing down, just that same steady pace through the trees. At one point, it passed behind a thicker cluster of branches. For a second, I lost sight of it. Then it came out the other side, exactly the same. No flicker, no dimming, no change at all. I started to feel this strange disconnect. Like what I was seeing didn't line up with how anything should behave. Light should interact with things. It should cast shadows. It should illuminate surfaces. This didn't. It just was. Around 5:21, I noticed something else. The usual background noise had faded. I hadn't realized it happening, but it was gone. No distant rustling, no faint movement, nothing. Just stillness. And that light. I swallowed, my mouth dry. I thought about standing up, getting out of the blind, maybe getting a better look, but something about that idea felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just like I shouldn't move. So I stayed where I was, watching. The light continued its path, weaving between trees without touching anything, never brushing a branch, never dipping lower. Always the same height, same distance above the ground. I checked my watch again, 5:23. It had been over 10 minutes. Then it started to fade, not quickly, not all at once, just a gradual dimming. The edges softened first, then the center. It didn't shrink, it didn't move away, it just became less visible, like it was blending back into the darkness. I leaned forward slightly, trying to keep it in sight. It was still there, fainter now, barely more than a glow. Then it was gone. No movement, no final shift, just gone. The space where it had been was empty. The trees looked normal again, the darkness settled back in, and the sounds, they came back slowly. A faint rustle somewhere behind me, a distant bird call, the forest returning to itself. I stayed there for a while longer, not moving, just staring at the spot where the light had disappeared, waiting to see if it would come back. It didn't. Eventually, the sky started to lighten. The trees became clearer. Everything looked exactly the way it should. But I kept thinking about how long I'd watched it. How it moved, how it didn't touch anything, didn't light anything, didn't make a single sound, and how for those 10 minutes it felt like the rest of the woods had just paused while it passed through. I noticed the gap before anyone said anything about lights. My name's Marcus Dyer. I worked night security at a logistics warehouse on the edge of an industrial park. Nothing high risk. Mostly checking doors, monitoring cameras, making sure nobody was wandering around where they shouldn't be. It was a pretty routine shift that night. Quiet, like most of them. I was in the control room around 2 a.m., just going through the usual camera feeds. We had about 20 cameras covering the building, parking lot, loading bays, and the roof. Everything looked normal. A couple of parked trucks, empty lot, no movement. I'd been flipping through feeds when one of the exterior cameras froze for a second. Not unusual. The system lagged sometimes, but when it came back, the timestamp had jumped. 2:13 to 2:23. 10 minutes gone. I leaned forward thinking it was just a display glitch. Switched to another camera. Same thing. The timestamp jumped. I went back through the recordings manually, scrubbing the timeline. There was no footage between 2:13 and 2:23. Not corrupted, not scrambled, just missing. A clean cut. like those 10 minutes had never been recorded. I sat back, staring at the screen. That didn't happen. Even when the system glitched, it still recorded something. Static, dropped frames, whatever. It didn't just skip time. I checked the system logs. No errors. No restarts. Nothing flagged during that period. I remember feeling that first bit of unease then. Not fear. Just something off. I pulled up another camera. Same gap. All of them had it. Every single feed jumped the exact same 10 minutes. I stood up, walked over to the window that overlooked the lot, looked outside. Nothing unusual. The night looked the same as it always did. I went back to the desk, still trying to make sense of it. That's when the radio cracked. It was one of the truck drivers parked out back. "Hey," he said, voice a little uncertain. "You guys messing with lights out here?" I picked up the receiver. "What do you mean?" There was a pause. Then he said, "Something was over the building. Bright, like real bright." I frowned, glanced at the monitors again. "When? Just now?" Or he hesitated. "I don't know. I looked up, saw it, then it was gone." I looked at the timestamp on the screen, 2:26. "You see it now?" I asked. "No," he said. "It's gone." Another voice came through then. Someone else outside. I saw it too, over the roof. I switched to the exterior cameras again. Nothing, just the empty lot. I rewound as far back as the system would let me. Straight to 213, the footage before the gap, everything normal. No lights, no movement. Then it jumped to 223, also normal. No lights, no movement, nothing in between. I picked up the radio again. "Where exactly did you see it?" "Right above the main building," the first driver said. "Just sitting there." "How long?" Another pause. "I don't know. Felt like a minute, maybe longer." I looked at the gap again. 10 minutes. I checked the other feeds. Nothing. No reflection, no brightness spike. No sign of anything unusual. I leaned back in the chair, trying to piece it together. If something that bright had been over the building, the cameras should have picked it up, even indirectly, even just a change in lighting. But there was nothing, just that missing chunk of time. I went back through the footage again, slower this time, watching for anything leading up to it. Around 2:12, I noticed something small. The image quality shifted slightly, not enough to stand out at first, just a faint softening, like the focus had drifted a bit. Then right before 2:13, everything went completely still. Not frozen, just still. No flicker, no movement at all. Even the subtle noise in the image flattened out. Then the gap. I leaned closer to the screen, replayed it again, same thing, that brief moment of stillness, then nothing. I checked the audio feeds. We had a couple of external mics set up near the loading bays. Same gap, but right before it cut, there was a sound. Very low, barely audible, like a hum. I turned up the volume, played it again. It wasn't mechanical, not like a truck engine or HVAC unit. It was smoother, steady, and it didn't seem to come from any direction, just present, then silence, then the gap. I sat there listening to it a few more times, trying to isolate it, but it was too faint, too brief. I leaned back again, staring at the monitors. The building looked the same as always. No signs of anything happening. I keyed the radio again. "You guys still out there?" "Yeah." "You seeing anything now?" "No," one of them said, "but it was there, I'm telling you." Another voice chimed in. It didn't make a sound, just light. I looked at the screens again. No evidence, nothing recorded, just that empty stretch of time. I spent the next hour going over everything. System logs, backup drives, nothing. No trace of those 10 minutes, like they'd been removed cleanly. Around 3:30, I stepped outside, walked out into the lot, looked up at the sky. Clear, no clouds, stars visible, everything normal. I stood there for a while, trying to picture what they described. A bright light hovering over the building, bright enough to notice immediately, but not bright enough to leave any trace on the cameras. And somehow, exactly during that time, the entire system just stopped recording. Not failed, not glitched, just skipped ahead. I went back inside after a few minutes, sat down in front of the monitors again, watched the feeds cycle, everything normal. But every time the timestamp ticked forward, I kept thinking about that missing gap, those 10 minutes that no one could account for, except for the people outside, who all saw something above the building, while the cameras, the one thing that should have captured it, recorded nothing at all. I noticed it because it didn't move. I'd been up all night already, which wasn't unusual for me. I worked early mornings at a marina on the edge of a wide river inlet, so my schedule was always a bit off. That morning I got there early, around 4:30, because we had a couple of boats scheduled to head out right at sunrise. My name's Colin Reeves. It was one of those quiet, cold mornings where everything feels a little slowed down. The air had that damp chill to it, and there was a light layer of mist sitting low over the water, not thick enough to block anything, just enough to soften the edges of things. I was unlocking the storage shed when I first noticed it. At first, I thought it was just a star. There's usually one or two that stay visible longer than the others, especially near the horizon. But this one felt off. It was too bright, for one, and too low. I stood there with the key still in the lock, just looking at it. It was sitting just above the far tree line across the water, maybe a few degrees up from the horizon. Bright, steady, not flickering like a star normally does that low. I finished unlocking the shed, but I kept glancing back at it. It didn't move, not even a little. No drift, no shift, nothing. That's when I started paying closer attention. I stepped out onto the dock, hands in my pockets, just watching. The water was completely still. No wind, no boats moving. No sound except the occasional creak of the dock under my weight. The light stayed fixed in the same spot. I checked my phone for the time. 42. Still about 20 minutes until sunrise. I figured maybe it was a planet. I don't know much about astronomy, but I know sometimes they look brighter than stars. Still, something about it didn't sit right. It looked closer than it should have been. Not huge, not overwhelming, just present, like it belonged to the landscape instead of the sky. A few minutes passed. I went back to getting things ready, checking ropes, making sure the fuel pumps were set. But I kept looking up every few seconds. Every time it was still there, exactly where it had been. No change, no blinking, no color shift. Just that steady white light. Around 4:55, one of the guys I worked with, Darren, pulled into the lot. He stepped out of his truck, stretched, and started walking toward the dock. "You're early," he called out. "Couldn't sleep," I said. I nodded toward the horizon. "You see that?" He squinted, looking out over the water. "Yeah," he said after a second. "What is that?" "I thought maybe a planet or something," I said. He shook his head slightly. "Feels too low." That was exactly it. Too low. We both stood there for a bit, just watching it. It didn't react to anything. Didn't dim, didn't brighten, didn't move. The sky was starting to lighten slightly by then. Not sunrise yet, but that faint gray-blue creeping in. And as the sky changed, the light stayed exactly the same. Didn't fade with the rest of the stars. Didn't shift. Just held its position. Darren went to start prepping one of the boats, but I stayed where I was. Something about it had my full attention now. The mist over the water started thinning out as the light increased. I could see the tree line more clearly. The light was still just above it, not rising with the sky, not setting, just fixed. Then I noticed something else. There was no reflection. The water was calm enough that even distant lights usually show something, even if it's faint. But this one didn't. The surface stayed dark, like the light wasn't actually shining onto it. I stepped closer to the edge of the dock, leaning slightly to get a better angle. Still nothing. No reflection at all. That made me uneasy in a way I couldn't really explain. It should have reflected, even a little. I heard Darren behind me, moving equipment around. "You still looking at it?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "It hasn't moved." He walked over again, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, that's weird," he said quietly. We both stood there again. The sky kept getting brighter. Birds started making noise somewhere in the trees behind us. Everything felt like it was waking up, except that light. It stayed exactly the same. Then the first edge of sunlight hit the horizon, just a thin line at first. The sky shifted from gray to a pale orange. And in that moment, the light changed. Not gradually, instantly. It got brighter, sharper, like it snapped into focus. I felt my stomach drop a little. Darren said something under his breath, but I didn't catch it. The light held for maybe a second, 2 at most. Then it shot straight up. Not angled, not arcing. Straight up. Faster than anything I've ever seen. It didn't leave a trail, no streak, no fading line behind it. It was just there, and then it wasn't. Gone. The spot where it had been was empty, just sky. We both stood there, not saying anything for a few seconds. Then Darren finally spoke. "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I was still staring at the empty space. The sky kept brightening. The sun came up like normal. Everything else continued like it hadn't happened. We went back to work after a minute or two. had boats to prep, customers coming in, normal routine. But I kept thinking about it, not just the way it moved, but how long it stayed still before that. How it didn't reflect on the water. How it didn't react to the changing light until that exact moment. Later that morning, I tried to point out the spot to one of the guys who came in late, told him where it had been. He just shrugged. Probably a plane, he said. But it hadn't been. Planes don't sit motionless like that, and they definitely don't go straight up like that. I checked my phone later to see if I'd caught anything by accident. No photos, no videos, just normal stuff. The whole thing lasted long enough that I should have thought to record it, but I didn't. I just stood there and watched, like I was waiting for it to do something, and it did, just not in a way that made any sense. The clocks all flipped at the same time. I didn't even notice the light yet. I was just driving, half focused on the road, when the dashboard blinked and everything went to 12, radio, center console, even the little digital clock on the instrument panel. It caught my attention because it wasn't gradual. No flicker, no dimming first. Just normal time. 1:18 a.m., then suddenly 12 across the board. My name's Aaron Pike. I was heading back from a late shift at a warehouse about 40 minutes outside town. The route I took cut through a stretch of back road that ran between fields and patches of trees. No streetlights, no houses close to the road. Just long, dark sections where your headlights were the only thing you could see. I remember thinking it was weird, but not immediately worrying about it. Electrical glitch, maybe. Cold night, older car. Stuff happens. I tapped the radio button, like that would do anything. It stayed at 12. Then the station cut out. Not static, just silence. The engine kept running fine. Headlights stayed on. Everything else seemed normal. I slowed down a little without really deciding to. The road ahead was empty, just the beam of my lights stretching out into darkness. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't in the sky directly above me. It was farther out, off to the right, past a line of trees that ran along the edge of a field. Bright white, not blinking, not moving, just sitting there, low over the tree line. At first, I thought it was a house light, or maybe a tower, but there weren't any buildings out there. I'd driven that road enough times to know that stretch was just open land. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. The light didn't spread like normal light would. It wasn't lighting up the trees around it or the ground beneath it. It just existed, like a point, but too big to be a star and too low. I checked the mirrors out of habit, nothing behind me, no other cars. The road was completely empty. I looked back at the dashboard, still 12. The radio still silent. I tried adjusting the volume. Nothing changed. I don't know why, but that's when I started feeling uneasy. Not panic, just that slow awareness that something wasn't lining up right. I kept driving, eyes shifting between the road and the light off to the side. It stayed in the same relative position for a while, like I was moving parallel to it. Then I noticed something else. The trees in front of it looked wrong. Not moving, exactly, but the edges of them weren't clear, like the light was flattening them somehow. I slowed down more, maybe 20 miles an hour now. I thought about pulling over, but there wasn't really anywhere safe to stop, just narrow shoulders and uneven ground. The light didn't change, didn't flicker, didn't shift, just stayed there. I checked the time again, still 12. I had no idea how long it had been like that. It felt longer than a minute, shorter than 10, hard to say. Then the engine sound changed slightly. Not like it was failing, more like the tone dropped for a second, a low hum under the normal noise. I felt it more than heard it. Through the steering wheel, through the seat, just a faint vibration. I tightened my grip on the wheel instinctively. The headlights seemed a little dimmer for a second, then back to normal. I looked back at the light. It looked closer now, not dramatically, but closer than it had been a moment ago. Or maybe I'd just gotten closer to it on the road. I couldn't tell. I remember thinking I should turn around, just make a U-turn and go back the way I came, but I didn't. I just kept going forward, slower than before. The hum came again, stronger this time. Still not loud, just present, like something in the air was vibrating. The light didn't react, didn't move, didn't change brightness, but something about it felt focused, like it was fixed on a point. And I had this strange feeling that the point might be me. I don't know where that thought came from. It just showed up, and once it did, it didn't go away. I checked the mirrors again. Still nothing. The road behind me was empty. No headlights, no movement, just darkness. I looked forward again, and for a split second I thought I saw something between me and the light. Not a solid shape, more like a distortion, like heat rising off pavement. But it was colder that night. No reason for heat waves. It moved slightly. Or maybe I did. Then it was gone. Just empty space again. I blinked, trying to refocus. My heart rate had picked up by then. I could feel it in my chest, steady but faster. I glanced at the dashboard again. Still 12. Then, without any warning, everything snapped back. The radio came on mid-song. The dashboard flipped to 119. The engine sound returned to normal. The hum disappeared, and the light was gone. Completely. The tree line looked normal again. No brightness, no distortion, just dark shapes against the sky. I slowed down even more, almost to a stop. Pulled over as far as I could. Sat there for a second, breathing, trying to process what had just happened. I checked the time again, 1:19. I'd lost about a minute, maybe less. It didn't feel like that. I looked out toward where the light had been. Nothing there, just fields and trees. I sat there for a while longer, engine idling, waiting to see if anything would come back. Nothing did. Eventually, I pulled back onto the road and kept driving. The rest of the way home was quiet. Normal. No more glitches. No more lights. But every few seconds, I found myself checking the clocks, just to make sure they were still moving, and half expecting them to snap back to 12 again, for no reason I could explain. I woke up because it was too quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet you get at night, where things are just muted. This was different. It felt like something had been taken out of the air. My name's Ethan Calder. I lived in a small suburban neighborhood, nothing remote, nothing isolated. You could usually hear something at night. Cars in the distance, wind through trees, someone's TV faintly through a wall. That night, there was nothing. I opened my eyes and just lay there for a second, trying to figure out what had woken me. My clock read 2:07 a.m. The room felt still, not just visually, physically, like the air itself wasn't moving. I listened. No traffic, no hum from outside. Even the usual faint noise from the house, pipes, vents was gone. I sat up slowly. Something about the silence felt heavy, like it was pressing in. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The floor was cold. I walked over to the window, pulled the curtain back just enough to look outside. At first, everything looked normal. Dark street, houses lined up the way they always were, no movement. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't coming from any one place. It wasn't a street light or a porch light. It was spread out, a faint white glow hanging above the neighborhood. Not high in the sky, lower, just above the rooftops. It didn't light anything up the way you'd expect. It didn't cast shadows. It didn't reflect off surfaces in a clear way. It just existed, like a layer of brightness sitting over everything. I leaned closer to the window, trying to see where it was coming from. There was no clear source, no beam, no direction, just that uniform glow. I opened the window slightly, expected to hear something. Anything. Still nothing. The silence stayed intact. Complete. I looked down at the street. Parked cars, driveways. Everything looked untouched, but something felt off. Hard to explain, like the space itself had shifted. I watched the glow for a while, maybe 30 seconds, maybe longer. Time felt strange. It didn't move, didn't flicker, didn't change intensity, just held there, steady. Then slowly it started to fade, not like a light turning off, more like it was being absorbed back into the darkness, evenly from all sides until it was gone. And just like that, the street looked normal again. I stood there for a few seconds, still staring out. Then the sound came back, not all at once. Gradually, a distant car, the faint rustle of leaves, the low hum of something electrical. It all returned like it had been paused and then resumed. I closed the window, sat back down on the bed, tried to make sense of it. My first thought was maybe I'd been dreaming, but I was fully awake. I remembered every detail clearly. The silence, the glow, the way it faded. I checked the time again, 2:11 a.m. Only a few minutes had passed. I lay back down, stared at the ceiling, waited to see if it would happen again. It didn't. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, everything felt normal. I went outside before work, looked around. Nothing out of place. Same houses, same street, same quiet neighborhood. I asked my neighbor later that day if they'd been up around that time. They said no, slept straight through the night. I didn't push it. Over the next few nights, I paid more attention, listened more carefully, checked outside a couple times around the same hour. Nothing happened, no silence, no glow, just normal night sounds. But every once in a while, I'd wake up briefly. Not fully, just enough to notice something. And there'd be a moment, a very short one, where everything felt too still again. Like the sound had dropped out for just a second, then it would come back. So quick I couldn't be sure it had happened. I started keeping my phone by the bed. Tried to record one of those moments, but whenever I checked the audio later, it was normal. Background noise the whole time. No gaps, no silence, no indication anything had changed. One night, maybe a week later, I woke up again around the same time. The room felt quiet, not as intense as before, but close. I sat up immediately, went to the window, looked out. There was no glow this time, just darkness. But for a second, I thought I saw something shift. Not a shape, not clearly. Just a subtle change in the way the darkness looked above the rooftops, like something had been there a moment earlier, and wasn't anymore. I stayed there for a while, watching, listening. The normal sounds were back, everything felt the way it should. But that earlier moment, the complete silence, the glow hanging over everything, it stuck with me, because it didn't feel like something that came from outside. It felt like something that had settled over the entire area at once. Like whatever it was, it didn't arrive in the way things usually do, and it didn't leave a trace behind, except for those few minutes when everything stopped, and something just hung there, quiet, above everything, before fading away completely. I woke up because something felt off before I even registered the sound. It was that kind of half-awake state where your brain's already picking up on something being wrong, but you don't know what yet. My eyes were still closed, but I could feel this faint vibration through the bed. Not shaking, not rattling, just a steady, low hum you could feel more than hear. Then I opened my eyes. The room was dim, but not dark. That's what made me sit up. My name's Daniel Hargreaves. I live in a semi-detached house on a quiet street. Nothing unusual, just rows of similar homes with small back gardens and a clear view of the rooftops behind. At night, my room is normally pitch black unless I leave something on. I hadn't that night. But now there was this faint glow coming in through the window. Not bright enough to light everything up, just enough to outline things. The wardrobe, the desk, the door, all of it looked slightly washed out, like the contrast had been turned down. The vibration was still there, low, steady. I sat up slowly, listening. It wasn't coming from any one direction. It just filled the room. Not loud, but constant. I checked the time on my phone, 2:17 a.m. I remember thinking it might be something outside, construction equipment maybe, or some kind of generator, but there wasn't any work going on nearby, especially not at that hour. The glow through the window seemed stronger than it should have been for anything like that. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floor felt normal. The vibration didn't come through my feet the same way it did through the bed. It was like it was in the air more than anything else. I walked over to the window. The curtains were half drawn, so I pushed them aside a little and looked out. That's when I saw it. It was hovering above the rooftops across the street, not high up, low enough that it felt close. It wasn't a defined shape at first glance, just a pale, glowing area, white but dull, like light filtered through something. I leaned closer to the glass. There was a shape inside it, not sharp, not clear, but something was there, a kind of oval, maybe, hard to tell. It didn't blink, didn't move, just hung there. The glow it gave off didn't behave normally. The rooftops beneath it weren't lit up. The street wasn't brighter, but the sky around it looked slightly different, like it was being affected somehow. The vibration got a little stronger, still subtle but more noticeable now that I was focused on it. I could feel it in my chest, not uncomfortable, just present, like standing near heavy machinery but without the noise. I glanced around the room. Everything was still, nothing rattling, nothing shifting, just that steady hum. I looked back outside. The object hadn't moved. I checked the houses across the street. A few windows had lights on, same as usual. No one standing outside, no one reacting. It didn't make sense. Something that bright, that low, someone should have noticed. I opened the window slightly, just enough to hear better. The air outside was still, cold, no wind, and no sound. That was the part that stuck with me. There should have been something, a hum, a buzz, anything, but there was nothing. The vibration was still there, but it didn't seem to come from outside. It felt contained, like it was only affecting certain things. I leaned out a little more, trying to get a better angle. The shape inside the glow shifted slightly, or maybe it didn't. It was hard to tell. Every time I tried to focus on it, it seemed to blur at the edges. I blinked a few times. Still there, still hovering, still silent. I checked my phone again. 2:19. Only 2 minutes had passed. It felt longer. I rested my hand on the window frame, steadying myself. The vibration pulsed slightly. Not a change in rhythm, just a brief increase, then back to normal. I held my breath for a second, listening. Nothing changed. The glow stayed the same. The shape inside it stayed indistinct. I looked down at the street. Empty. No cars moving, no people, just the usual parked vehicles and quiet houses. I had this thought that maybe it was watching something. Not me specifically. Just observing. I don't know why that came to mind. It just did. And once it did, I couldn't shake it. The vibration pulsed again, a little stronger this time, then settled. I pulled my head back inside and looked around the room again. Everything looked slightly off in that dim glow. Edges softer than they should have been. Shadows faint, almost non-existent. I turned back to the window, and the moment I looked away, it disappeared. Not faded, not moved, just gone. The glow vanished instantly. The sky snapped back to normal darkness, and the vibration stopped completely. The silence that followed felt louder than the hum had been. I stood there for a second, staring at the empty space where it had been. Nothing. No afterimage, no movement, just the usual night sky above the rooftops. I checked the time again, 2:20, 3 minutes. That's all it had been. I closed the window slowly, pulled the curtains back into place. The room went dark again, normal dark. I stood there a little longer, waiting to see if anything would come back. Nothing did. Eventually, I got back into bed, lay there, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, no vibration, no light, just normal. But every few seconds, I found myself listening, waiting for that hum to start again, or for the room to fill with that faint glow, like it had just paused and might come back the moment I stopped expecting it. I noticed the light before I realized anything was wrong. It was just sitting there over the field to my right, maybe 30 or 40 feet up, bright but not harsh, like a floodlight with no visible source. I remember thinking it was weird because there's nothing out there, no buildings, no farm equipment, nothing that would need that kind of lighting. My name's Aaron Pike. This happened on a back road outside of Linton, the kind of road you only take if you live nearby or you're cutting time off a longer route. I'd driven it plenty of times before, mostly at night after work. That stretch was always dark. No streetlights, no houses close enough to spill light onto the road, just fields on both sides and a thin line of trees here and there. So when I saw that light ahead, it stood out immediately. At first, I thought it might be a truck with its high beams angled weird, maybe parked off the road. But as I got closer, the shape didn't change. It wasn't coming from the ground, it was above it, hovering. I slowed down a little without really meaning to. Not braking hard, just easing off the gas. The light didn't flicker or move, it just stayed there, perfectly steady. I glanced at my rearview mirror, no cars behind me. The road ahead was empty too. Just me and that light. I remember reaching over and turning the radio down so I could focus better. It was playing some late-night talk show, nothing important. The moment I touched the volume knob, the radio cut out, not lowered, just gone, dead silence. I frowned, looked down at the console. The screen had gone black. I tapped it, nothing. At the same time, I noticed the dashboard lights dim slightly. Not off, just weaker, like the car was losing power for a second. But the engine kept running. I could still feel it, still hear it faintly. I looked back up. I was almost directly beneath the light now. And that's when everything shut off, all at once. The dashboard went completely dark. The headlights cut out, the radio, the clock, even the little charging light for my phone, all gone. For a split second, it felt like the car had stalled, but it hadn't. The engine was still running. I could feel the vibration through the steering wheel. I could hear the tires on the road, but everything electrical was dead. The road ahead disappeared into darkness except for that light above me. It was the only thing illuminating anything. And it didn't spread the way normal light does. It didn't cast wide beams or long shadows. It just lit the ground directly beneath it in a soft, contained circle. I drove straight through it, didn't stop, didn't think to stop. I just kept going. As I passed under it, the inside of the car felt different. I don't know how to explain that properly. The air felt heavier, not physically pressing down, just thick, like the space inside the car had changed slightly. There was a faint sound too, not loud, not sharp, more like a low hum, but not quite mechanical. It didn't seem to come from any direction, just existed around me for that second or two. I glanced up through the windshield. I couldn't see the source of the light, just brightness above, no shape, no outline. Then I was past it, and everything came back, instantly. The headlights snapped on, the dashboard lit up, the radio came back mid-sentence, like it had never stopped. Even my phone screen lit up again on its own. I flinched, gripped the wheel tighter, checked the mirrors. Still no cars. I looked back at the road ahead, then quickly glanced in the rear view. The light was still there, exactly where it had been, hovering over the field, same brightness, same position. I slowed down again, this time more deliberately. Part of me wanted to keep going and forget it. Another part needed to understand what I'd just driven through. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder a little ways ahead and stopped, left the engine running, turned in my seat to look back. The light hadn't moved. It was just hanging there over the field. No sound now, no flickering, no change. I opened the car door slightly, stepped out. The air outside felt normal. Cool, quiet, the usual night sounds, distant insects, a faint breeze. Nothing like what I'd felt inside the car. I stood there for a minute, watching it, trying to see any kind of structure or source. But there was nothing. No pole, no drone, no cables. Just a bright, steady glow suspended above the ground. I got back in the car and checked everything. The clock was still right. The trip meter hadn't reset. No warning lights. It was like nothing had happened, except it had. I looked back one more time. The light stayed there, completely still. I thought about driving back toward it, seeing if it would happen again, but I didn't. I don't know why exactly. I just didn't want to pass under it a second time. So I pulled back onto the road and kept going. After maybe a minute or two, I checked the rear view again. The light was gone. Not fading, not moving away, just gone. The rest of the drive home was normal. Everything in the car worked fine, no more issues. But every so often I'd glance at the dashboard, just to make sure it was still on. And I kept thinking about how the engine never stopped, even when everything else did. Like whatever I drove through had shut down everything electrical, but left just enough running to carry me straight through it without giving me the chance to stop. I noticed it because it didn't flicker like the others. I was sitting out back a little after 11, just on one of those cheap plastic chairs, phone in my hand, but not really doing anything with it. My name's Caleb Rourke. I lived in a small place just outside a wooded area, nothing remote, but far enough that you could actually see the sky clearly on a good night. It was cool out, dry, no wind. The kind of night where everything just feels still. I'd been out there for maybe 10 minutes when I looked up and saw it. At first, I thought it was just a bright star. There are always a few that stand out more than the others. This one was low in the sky, just above the tree line in the distance. Brighter than most, steady, no blinking like a plane, no movement that I could tell. I didn't think much of it. Just another point of light. But after a minute or so, something about it started to bother me. I couldn't put my finger on it right away. Then I realized it wasn't staying in the same place, not drifting like a plane, not arcing like a satellite. It was dropping, slowly. So slow I almost thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But I picked a reference point, a gap in the trees, and watched it. Over the next couple minutes, it moved lower. Barely noticeable unless you were really paying attention. But it was definitely descending. I sat up a little straighter. Now I was focused on it. I checked the rest of the sky. Everything else was where it should be. Stars fixed in place, a few faint ones barely visible. But this one was moving. I thought maybe it was a plane coming toward me, but there were no navigation lights, no blinking, just that steady white glow. And it wasn't getting brighter, just lower. I stood up, walked a few steps closer to the edge of the yard. The trees were dark silhouettes against the sky. The light was now maybe a few degrees above them, still descending, still perfectly steady, no sound. That's when it started to feel off. Even planes at that distance, you usually hear something. A faint hum, a distant engine. There was nothing. Just quiet. I checked my phone. No signal out there. Didn't matter anyway. I wasn't sure what I'd even look up. I went back to watching it, trying to make sense of the movement. It didn't accelerate, didn't slow down, just a constant, smooth drop, like it was being lowered on something I couldn't see. When it got close to the tree line, I expected it to disappear behind it. That's what should have happened. Instead, it stopped. Not gradually, not easing into it, just stopped. Right above the trees, I froze. It hung there for a second, perfectly still. Then it moved, not down, not up, sideways, to the right. Same smooth motion, same steady speed, like the direction had just changed. I actually let out a small laugh at that point. Not because it was funny, more like my brain was trying to process something it didn't understand. I followed it with my eyes. It slid along the horizon just above the treetops. No change in brightness, no flicker, no sound. I turned my body to keep it in view. It kept going. Same pace, same height. It passed over a darker patch of trees and stood out more clearly there. That's when I noticed something else. The light itself wasn't perfectly round. It looked like it at first glance, but when I focused on it, it had a slight elongation. Subtle, like it wasn't a point, but a shape. Still faint, still hard to define, but not exactly what I'd expect from a distant star or plane. I rubbed my eyes, looked again. It was still moving, still sideways. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone else noticing it, but there was no one. Just me, standing in the yard, watching this thing move in a way that didn't make sense. After maybe 20 seconds of sideways movement, it slowed, then stopped again. Same abrupt stop, no easing, just motion, then stillness. I felt this weird tension build up, like something was about to happen, but nothing did. It just hung there, quiet, still. Then, without warning, it changed direction again. This time it moved back the way it came, same height, same speed, like it was retracing its path. I stepped forward again, closer to the edge of the yard, trying to keep it in view between the trees. It moved for a few seconds, then stopped one more time, and then it dimmed. Not quickly, not like it turned off. It just faded, gradually, until it blended in with the rest of the sky, and then it was gone. I stood there for a while after that, looking at the same spot, waiting to see if it would come back. Nothing did. The sky looked normal again, stars in their places, no movement, no unusual brightness, just the same quiet night. I sat back down, eventually. Tried to go back to what I was doing before, but I kept glancing up, checking that part of the sky. Nothing. After a while, I went inside, closed the door, locked it without really thinking about it. Before I went to bed, I looked out the window one more time. Same view, same trees, same empty sky. But the way I saw it had changed, like I knew now that something could be there. Moving in ways that didn't match anything I understood, only visible for a few minutes, before disappearing completely, leaving the sky looking exactly the same, as if nothing had ever been there at all. My GPS dropped out right as the road flattened into that long, empty stretch. No warning. The screen just froze for a second, then switched to searching for signal. I tapped it like that was going to fix anything, but it stayed stuck. I was about an hour outside of Ely, heading south. Nothing out there but scrub, low hills, and that straight ribbon of highway that looks like it goes on forever. It was late, around 11:40 p.m., and still warm from the day, the kind of heat that sticks around in the asphalt. My name's Marcus Ibarra. I'd done that drive before, not often, but enough to know where I was. You don't really need GPS out there, there's basically one road. Still, it felt off seeing the signal drop. My phone had bars, but they were weak. No data. I kept driving. At first, nothing else changed. Engine steady, headlights cutting the same narrow path, radio playing low. Then the radio crackled. Not loud, just a quick burst of static, like it had skipped over something. I glanced at it, adjusted the volume. It cleared up for a second, then did it again. I turned it off. Didn't want the distraction. The road ahead was empty. No headlights coming the other way, no taillights in front of me. Just black sky and the faint outline of hills off in the distance. That's when I noticed the lights. They weren't directly ahead, more off to the right side. At first, I thought they were stars sitting low on the horizon, but something about them didn't match. There were three of them, dim, white, arranged in a triangle, perfectly even spacing between each point. I watched them for a few seconds, trying to figure out what I was looking at. They weren't blinking, they weren't moving like planes, and they were too low to be stars. I kept driving, eyes shifting between the road and those lights. After a minute or so, I realized something else. They were keeping pace with me, not getting closer, not falling behind, just staying there. Same distance, same position relative to the car. I sped up slightly, not a lot, just enough to test it. The engine picked up, the road blurred a little more at the edges, the lights stayed exactly where they were, no change. I slowed back down, same thing, they didn't adjust visibly, but somehow they matched me again. I felt that slow, creeping tension settle in, not panic, just unease. I rolled my window down halfway. The air outside was still warm. No wind, no sound except the engine and tires on the road. I leaned slightly toward the window, trying to get a better angle. The lights didn't flicker, didn't shift, they just held that formation. Perfect triangle. I checked my mirrors, nothing behind me, completely empty road. I looked back at the GPS, still searching, frozen in place. I picked up my phone, tried to load anything, nothing came through. The lights were still there, same distance, maybe a mile out, hard to tell in the dark. I drove like that for a while. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been longer. Time started to feel a little stretched. I kept expecting something to change, for them to move, for them to disappear. But they didn't. They just stayed locked in place. Then something else happened. The sound inside the car shifted. At first, I thought it was the road surface changing, but it wasn't that. It was like the background noise. The low hum you don't usually notice started to fade. The engine still sounded normal, but everything else felt muted, like the air inside the car had thickened. I tapped the steering wheel with my fingers. The sound felt dull, less sharp than it should have been. I swallowed. Even that sounded different. I looked at the lights again, still there, still perfectly arranged, but now they seemed a little clearer, not brighter, just more defined, like the edges of them had sharpened. I noticed something subtle then. The triangle wasn't rotating, wasn't tilting. It stayed perfectly aligned, no matter how the road curved slightly or how my perspective shifted. That didn't make sense. Anything at that distance should change angle as I moved, but it didn't. It stayed fixed, like it wasn't anchored to the landscape at all. I slowed the car down more, almost to a crawl. The lights didn't rush ahead, didn't lag behind. They just adjusted without moving. Still the same distance away. That's when I started to think about stopping, just pulling over and seeing what happened. But something in me hesitated. The same kind of hesitation you get when you're about to do something you know might not go well. I kept rolling forward instead, slow, watching. The silence in the car got heavier, not completely gone, just reduced, like something was pressing down on it. I reached over and turned the radio back on. Nothing, just static, low, steady. I turned it off again, looked back at the lights. They hadn't changed, but for a moment, I thought I saw something between them. Not a solid shape, more like a faint darkness connecting the points. Hard to explain, like the absence of light in a pattern. I blinked, looked again, it was gone. Just the three lights. I rubbed my eyes with one hand, kept driving. The road ahead stayed empty, no signs, no other cars, just that long stretch of asphalt. Then, without thinking too much about it, I took my foot off the gas and let the car slow down. I wanted to see if they'd pass me. The speed dropped. 50, 40. 30. The engine idled lower. The car coasted. The lights stayed exactly where they were. Same distance, same formation. I slowed almost to a stop, and for a second, everything felt completely still. Like the car wasn't even moving anymore, even though I knew it was. The lights didn't drift forward, didn't close the gap. They just held position, like distance didn't apply to them the same way. I sat there, barely rolling, watching them. My hands were tight on the wheel. I realized I was holding my breath. Then, all at once, the sound came back. Full, normal. The hum of the engine filled the car again. The faint noise of air moving past the windows. Everything snapped back into place. At the same moment, the lights shifted. Not gradually, not smoothly. They just weren't there anymore. No fading, no movement, just empty sky. I blinked hard, looked again, nothing, just darkness and distant stars. I sat there for a few seconds, car barely moving. Then I looked down at the GPS. Signal restored. Map updated instantly. Like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed with notifications coming back in, messages loading, data reconnecting. I didn't stop, didn't get out. I pressed the gas and kept driving. The rest of the trip was normal, completely normal, but I kept checking the mirrors, kept glancing out to the right, half expecting to see them again. They never came back. And the thing that stuck with me wasn't just the lights. It was the way they stayed the same distance, no matter what I did. Like they weren't following me, and I wasn't catching up to them. Like we were both just moving through the same stretch of road at the same time, without actually getting any closer to each other. I first noticed the headlights because they weren't getting any closer. It was late, just past midnight, and I was about 40 minutes into a drive I'd done 100 times before. My name's Ryan Ellison. I worked maintenance for a water treatment plant outside a small town, and the shift rotation meant I was usually heading home at weird hours. That road was the fastest way back. 2 lanes, no streetlights, long stretches of nothing but fields and tree lines. You'd maybe pass 1 or 2 cars if you were lucky. That night, I hadn't seen anyone for at least 15 minutes. I checked my mirror out of habit. That's when I saw them. A pair of headlights behind me. Not unusual on its own, but they were far back, and they stayed there. I drove for another minute or two, not really thinking about it. Then I glanced back again. Same distance, same brightness. Like the car hadn't moved at all. I adjusted my speed a little, dropped from about 55 to 50. Usually, if someone's behind you, that's enough to change the gap. Either they catch up or they fall back. These didn't. They stayed exactly where they were. I watched them more closely after that. Every few seconds, I'd flick my eyes up to the mirror. Same position, same spacing between the lights. Even the way they bounced slightly with the road felt consistent. Too consistent. I told myself it was just perspective. Long, straight road could mess with your sense of distance. But then I hit a slight curve, the kind that bends just enough to break a straight line of sight. For a moment, the headlights disappeared behind the trees. Then they came back into view. Still the same distance behind me. No closer, no farther. I felt something shift in my chest then, not panic. Just that subtle feeling when something doesn't line up the way it should. I kept driving, tried to ignore it, focused on the road ahead, but I kept checking the mirror, and every time it was the same. No change, no variation, just those lights sitting at a fixed point behind me. After a while, I decided to test it. I sped up, pushed it to about 65, held it there for a good 30 seconds, checked the mirror, still there, same distance. I slowed down again, back to 50, then 45. The headlights didn't react, didn't close the gap, didn't drift back, just stayed. At that point, I started to feel it more, that quiet unease, the kind that builds slowly. I rolled my window down a bit, let some of the night air in, tried to ground myself. The road was empty ahead. No other cars, no lights in the distance, just darkness and the faint glow of my headlights on the pavement. I checked the mirror again, still there. I started paying attention to details, the color of the lights. They were white, not too bright, not dim, just normal, no flickering, no change in intensity. I couldn't make out the shape of the car, just the lights, no outline. No body, nothing beyond that. Another few minutes passed, same thing, same distance, same position. I thought about pulling over, letting them pass, see what kind of car it was. But something about that idea made me hesitate. I don't know why, it just didn't feel like a normal situation. Still, I didn't want to keep driving like that, so I found a straight stretch with a wide shoulder, slowed down, put my indicator on, started easing to the side of the road. As I did, I watched the mirror closely. The headlights didn't change, no sign they were slowing down, no sign they were preparing to pass. They just stayed behind me, same distance. I came to a stop, fully on the shoulder, engine idling, indicator still blinking. I waited, eyes fixed on the mirror. The headlights were still there, for about 2 seconds. Then, they weren't. No movement, no fading, no turning off, just gone. The space behind me was completely dark, empty. I sat there, staring at the mirror, trying to process it. I turned around in my seat, looked directly through the back window. Nothing. No car, No lights, no sound, just the empty road stretching out behind me. I got out of the car, stood on the shoulder, looked both ways. There was nowhere for a car to go. No side roads, no driveways, nothing but fields and trees. I walked a few steps down the road. Still nothing. No engine noise, no tire sounds, no indication that anything had been there at all. I went back to the car, sat down, closed the door. For a second, I just sat there with my hands on the wheel. The quiet felt heavier now, like it had settled in after something left. I looked in the mirror again, still empty. I pulled back onto the road, started driving again. Slower this time, more cautious. I kept checking the mirror, half expecting the lights to come back. They didn't. The rest of the drive was uneventful. No other cars, no strange sounds, just the normal hum of the engine and the tires on the road. But something felt off, like the space behind me wasn't as empty as it looked. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a minute, engine off, lights out, looking into the rearview mirror, nothing there, just my own reflection and the dark street behind me. I went inside, locked the door, didn't think much more about it that night. But the next time I drove that road, late again, same time, I caught myself checking the mirror more often than usual, watching for those headlights. And even when the road was completely empty, there was this part of me that expected to see them again, sitting at that same distance, keeping pace without ever getting closer or farther away, just there, until the moment I decided to look directly and found nothing at all. I saw it before I even got the boat in the water. It was still dark, maybe 20 minutes before first light. I'd parked up near the ramp like I always did, same spot, same routine. My name's Dean Walsh. I fish that lake a couple times a week, usually early mornings before work. It was one of those colder mornings where fog sits low over the water. Not thick enough to block everything, just enough to soften the edges of things. I stepped out of the truck, grabbed my gear, and that's when I noticed the light. It was out over the lake, not far, maybe a couple 100 yards from shore. At first, I thought it was another boat. Wouldn't be unusual. But something about it didn't match. It wasn't moving, and it wasn't the right kind of light. Most boats have a mix of colors, red, green, maybe a white beam cutting across the water. This was just white, clean, steady, almost like a single point, but too large to be a star. I stood there for a second, watching it, waiting to see if it shifted. It didn't. The fog around it stayed exactly the same. That was the first thing that felt off. Normally, light in fog spreads. You get that glow, that halo effect. This didn't. The light was there, clear and defined, but the fog around it stayed dim, like it wasn't interacting with it. I walked closer to the edge of the water, set my tackle box down without really thinking about it. The lake was completely still. No ripples, no wind. Just that low layer of fog and the faint outline of the opposite shore. The light hung there, maybe 10 or 15 feet above the surface. Not high, not low enough to touch the water. Just suspended. I watched its reflection. That's what made me stop moving. The reflection was clear. A bright streak on the surface stretching down toward me. But it didn't look quite right. It was too sharp, too defined. Usually reflections on water distort a little. They ripple, even on calm water. This one didn't. It looked almost fixed, like it was painted onto the surface. I crouched down at the edge of the dock, looked at it from a lower angle. Same thing, perfectly straight, no shimmer, no break. I reached down and touched the water, just lightly. The surface rippled out from my fingers, and for a second the reflection didn't react. The ripple passed through it, distorted the water around it, but the reflection itself stayed intact. Then a moment later, it shifted back into place, like it had lagged behind. I pulled my hand back, stared at it, trying to understand what I'd just seen. The light itself hadn't changed, still steady, still silent, no sound at all, not even a hum. I stood up again, looked around. The trees along the shore were barely visible through the fog. Everything else felt normal, except for that one thing, out there, holding perfectly still. I checked my watch. Time was moving normally, second hand ticking like it should. I looked back at the light. Still there. Same position. Same brightness. I considered getting the boat in and heading out toward it, but something about that idea didn't sit right. It wasn't fear exactly, just a strong sense that I shouldn't get any closer, so I stayed where I was, watching, waiting. The sky started to lighten slowly. that faint blue-gray that comes before sunrise. The fog shifted slightly with it, but the light didn't. It stayed exactly where it had been. As the sky brightened, I expected it to fade, like stars do, but it didn't. It held its brightness, unchanged. I noticed something else then. As the light around it increased, the shape became a little clearer. Not detailed, but it wasn't just a point. There was a slight curve to it, like part of something larger I couldn't fully see. Still faint, still hard to define, but definitely not just a simple light source. The reflection stayed locked beneath it. Same straight line, same sharp edge, even as the water shifted slightly with the morning breeze starting to pick up. I heard a bird call somewhere behind me, the first real sound of the morning. It felt almost out of place, like the rest of the world was starting back up again. I looked at the light again, and for the first time I thought it might be getting dimmer. Not quickly, just slightly. The sky was brighter now. You could make out more detail across the lake. The fog was thinning, and then, in the span of maybe a few seconds, it was gone. Not fading out completely, just not there anymore. One moment it was there. The next, empty space. The reflection vanished with it. No ripple, no disturbance, nothing left behind. I stood there for a while after that, staring at the same spot. The water looked normal again, just a calm surface with the early light reflecting off it. No sign anything had been there. I went through the motions after that, launched the boat, headed out, tried to fish like I usually did, but I kept glancing back toward that area. Nothing ever reappeared. The rest of the morning was normal. Too normal. Like the lake had reset itself. When I got back to shore, I looked out one last time. Same view, same calm water, same early daylight. No trace of the light, no distortion. Nothing to suggest anything unusual had happened. But that reflection, the way it didn't move with the water, the way it held its shape even when everything else shifted, that stuck with me more than the light itself. Because whatever was out there, it wasn't just in the sky, it was affecting the water below it, in a way that didn't follow how anything I've ever seen is supposed to work. And it stayed there long enough for me to watch it, without ever changing, until it simply wasn't there anymore. I woke up because of the light. At first, I thought it was morning, like the sun had come up early and was hitting the inside of the tent weird. But it wasn't that kind of light. It was too focused. It was coming from my flashlight. It was sitting on the floor of the tent, pointing up at the ceiling, fully on. I didn't move right away. I just stared at it, trying to make sense of it. I knew for a fact the batteries were dead. Not low, not almost dead. Dead. I'd tried to use it the night before when I was setting up, and it barely flickered before cutting out. I remember tapping it against my hand, unscrewing the cap, tightening it again. Nothing. So I'd tossed it into the corner and used my headlamp instead. Now it was on, bright, steady, no flicker. I pushed myself up slowly on my elbows. The tent felt warm, warmer than it should have been for that time of night. It had dropped pretty cold after sunset, enough that I'd zipped the sleeping bag all the way up. Now the air felt off. Still, I reached over and grabbed the flashlight. It felt slightly warm in my hand. Not hot, just like it had been on for a while. I turned it off. It clicked normally. I hesitated, then turned it back on. Same brightness, no dimming. I sat there for a second, holding it, my brain trying to catch up. Then I noticed the sound. It was faint, so faint I almost missed it. A low humming coming from outside the tent. Not mechanical, not like a generator or anything I'd heard before. More like a tone. Steady, but not perfectly flat. There was a slight rise and fall to it, like it was breathing in a way. I froze, listening. The woods had gone quiet, completely quiet. No insects, no wind, no leaves moving, nothing but that hum. I checked my phone. 2:18 a.m., no signal, but that was normal out there. I was camped off a trail about 10 miles from the nearest road, up in a patch of forest that didn't get much traffic. I'd picked it because it was quiet. Now it was too quiet. The humming seemed to shift slightly. Not louder, just closer, or maybe more focused. I couldn't tell. I turned the flashlight off again and set it down. The inside of the tent went dark, except for a faint glow leaking through the fabric from outside. That's when I noticed it. The tent walls weren't as dark as they should have been. There was a very soft light outside. Not bright enough to see clearly through the fabric, but enough to outline shapes. I could see the vague silhouette of my pack leaning against the tent wall. the curve of the zipper, my boots near the entrance, all faintly visible. I held still, listening. The hum didn't change, didn't get louder or quieter. It just stayed there, present. I reached up slowly and unzipped the tent a few inches. The zipper sounded too loud in the silence, like it echoed. I stopped halfway, waited. The humming didn't react. I opened it a little more, just enough to look out. The forest looked wrong. That's the best way I can describe it. Not dramatically different, just slightly off. The light outside wasn't coming from a clear source. It wasn't like moonlight. It didn't cast shadows in the usual way. Everything looked evenly lit, but dim. The trees were visible, but their edges felt softer than they should have been, like the contrast had been turned down. I pushed the flap open a bit more. Looked around. The clearing I'd set up in was small, surrounded by tall trees. Normally, you'd see patches of sky through the branches. Now it was just gray, not clouded, just a uniform, dim tone. The humming shifted again. This time I felt it, not just heard it. A slight vibration in my chest. Barely noticeable, but there. I swallowed. The air outside felt warmer than it should have been. Same as inside the tent. I stepped out slowly, barefoot on the ground. The dirt felt warm too. Not hot, just not cold. I stood there for a second, letting my eyes adjust. The light didn't change, didn't get brighter or darker. It just stayed constant. I looked up. The sky didn't look like sky. No stars, no clear clouds, just that same dim, even glow, like a ceiling. I felt my stomach tighten. The humming deepened slightly, just enough to notice. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, nothing stood out, but there was a feeling like something was there. Not close enough to see, but present, watching. I took a few steps away from the tent. The ground felt the same everywhere, warm, soft. The hum seemed to follow me, or maybe I was just more aware of it now. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. There was no direction to it. It was just everywhere. I stopped near the edge of the clearing, looked into the trees. The darkness between them seemed thicker, not darker, just denser, like it had weight. For a second, I thought I saw something shift, a slight movement between two trunks, but when I focused on it, there was nothing, just the same dim light, same stillness. I realized I was holding my breath again. I forced myself to inhale. The air felt normal, no smell change, just that warmth. I backed up slowly toward the tent. Didn't want to turn my back on the trees, didn't know why. The hum stayed steady, didn't rise or fall. I reached the tent, crouched down, and slipped back inside. Zipped it closed. The sound of the zipper felt too loud again. I grabbed the flashlight, turned it on. Still bright, still steady. I sat there, listening, watching the tent walls. The faint light outside didn't change. The hum didn't stop. Time stretched again. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been minutes, could have been longer. At some point, the humming started to fade, very slowly, like it was pulling away. The vibration in my chest eased. The light outside dimmed, not all at once, gradually, until the tent walls went dark again. I waited. Didn't move, didn't even shift position. Eventually, the normal sounds came back. A single insect at first, then another, then the faint rustle of leaves, the usual background noise of the woods. I checked my phone again, 2:24 a.m. 6 minutes had passed. It didn't feel like 6 minutes. I stayed awake for a while after that. Didn't sleep much. When morning came, everything looked normal. Cold ground, clear sky, sunlight filtering through the trees the way it should. I packed up slowly, kept looking around the clearing. There was no sign anything had happened. No marks, no disturbed ground, nothing out of place. The flashlight was still working. Same brightness, same steady beam. I unscrewed the cap and checked the batteries, same ones I'd put in days before. No reason they should have come back to life. I tried to think of something that made sense. Loose connection, temperature change, something simple. But that didn't explain the light outside, or the humming, or the way the forest had gone completely silent. I left that morning and didn't go back to that spot. Not because of anything specific, just didn't feel right. And the part that stuck with me wasn't just waking up to the flashlight. It was the feeling that whatever had been out there hadn't turned it on by accident. It had done it while I was asleep and left it pointing straight up, like it wanted the light inside the tent before it moved on. I didn't notice it the first night because I wasn't looking. My name's Colin Reeves. I worked night shift at a distribution warehouse just outside a small industrial park. Nothing interesting about the place, just rows of shelving, forklifts, loading bays, and a lot of empty space once the trucks stopped coming in. I usually took my break around 3 a.m. There wasn't much going on then. Most of the crew was inside, half asleep, and the outside yard stayed quiet. The second night was when I first saw it. I stepped out the side door with my coffee, leaned against the railing, and looked out over the lot. It was one of those cold, clear nights where everything looks sharper than usual. That's when I noticed the light. It was out past the fence, maybe a couple hundred yards away, just above the ground. A single pale glow. Not bright enough to light anything up, but bright enough to stand out against the darkness. At first, I figured it was a piece of equipment or a distant vehicle parked somewhere, but it didn't flicker, didn't move, and it wasn't casting any light onto the ground around it. I stood there for a minute, watching it. Then I checked my watch. 3:14 a.m. I didn't think much of that at the time. Finished my coffee, went back inside, and forgot about it. The next night, same routine, same break, same time. I stepped outside again, mostly out of habit, and the light was there. Same spot, same height, same dull, steady glow. That's when it registered. I checked my watch again, 3:14 a.m. exactly. I frowned, took a step forward, trying to get a better look. It didn't change, didn't react, just stayed there. I remember thinking it was weird, but not enough to worry about. Probably some fixed light I hadn't noticed before. Maybe part of another building, but I'd worked there long enough to know the layout. There wasn't anything out there, no structures, no poles, just open land and a stretch of dirt road. The third night, I went outside a minute early, just to see if it was already there. 3:13 a.m., nothing, just empty dark. Then as I watched, it appeared. Not like something turning on, more like it was suddenly just there. No transition, no brightening. 1 second, nothing, the next, the light. I felt that slight drop in my stomach. I checked my watch, 3:14, right on it. I stood there longer that time, trying to figure out if it moved at all. It didn't. It stayed fixed in place, no drift, no flicker, no change in intensity. I even walked down the steps and out into the lot a little. It didn't get bigger, didn't get smaller. Distance felt wrong, like it wasn't tied to perspective properly. I went back inside after a while, didn't mention it to anyone, didn't seem like something worth bringing up. But the next few nights I kept checking. Every time, same thing, 3:14, the light appeared. Same position, same height, same steady glow. It started to feel less like something I was noticing and more like something that was waiting. One night I brought it up to Darren, one of the forklift guys, told him to come outside with me. He came out around 3:15. The light was there. I pointed it out. He squinted for a second, then shrugged. Probably a tower or something, he said. But there weren't any towers out there, and even if there were, it wouldn't just appear at the exact same time every night. He didn't seem interested. Went back inside after a minute. After that, I stopped mentioning it, just kept watching it on my own. Then came the night it changed. I stepped outside like usual, 3:13, nothing. I stood there, waiting, watching the same empty stretch of land. 3:14 hit, and the light appeared. But this time, it wasn't where it had been. It was closer. Not by a small amount, significantly closer. Instead of being out past the fence, it was now just beyond it, maybe 50 yards away. Same height, same brightness, same exact glow, but closer. I froze. Didn't step forward, didn't step back. Just stood there, staring at it. My first thought was that I'd misjudged the distance before, that maybe it had always been closer than I thought. But I knew that wasn't right. I'd walked out into the lot before. I'd watched it from different angles. It had never been that close. I checked my watch, 3:14. Same time. The light didn't move, didn't drift, just hung there. I felt that same pressure in the air I couldn't quite explain. Not physical exactly, just a sense that something had shifted. I took one step forward. The gravel under my shoe crunched louder than it should have. The sound felt sharp, out of place. The light didn't react, didn't brighten, didn't dim. It just stayed fixed. I noticed something else then. The fence between me and it. Usually you'd see the outline clearly against any kind of light behind it. But this time, the fence looked faint. Like the light wasn't hitting it properly, like it was passing through in a way that didn't make sense. I took another step, then stopped. The distance still felt wrong. Like I couldn't judge how far away it actually was. It looked close, but not close in a normal way. More like it had been scaled incorrectly. I stood there for maybe a minute, maybe less. My sense of time wasn't great at that point. Then, without warning, it disappeared. Same as before. No fade, no movement, just gone. The space where it had been looked normal again. Fence clear, ground dark, nothing out of place. I stayed out there a little longer, waiting, hoping it would come back. It didn't. I went back inside eventually, tried to act normal, but I kept checking the clock, waiting for 3:14 to roll around again the next night. It did. And the light came back. Same closer position, same exact spot it had been the night before. It didn't move any closer after that, at least not while I was watching. But it didn't go back to where it had originally been either. It stayed there, 50 yards out, every night at exactly 3:14. And the part I still can't shake isn't just that it showed up, it's that it changed position once. Like it had decided to be closer without ever moving get there. Just appearing nearer than before and staying that way, like the distance between us wasn't something fixed, but something it could adjust without crossing the space in between. The storm had already been going for a while when I noticed it. I was standing in the doorway of the garage, just watching the rain come down. It was one of those heavy summer storms where the air feels charged before anything even starts, and then once it hits, it just doesn't let up. My name's Aaron Pike. I lived on the edge of a small town, the kind where houses thin out into fields pretty quickly. That night, the sky was completely covered. No breaks, just thick cloud, low and fast moving. Lightning had been flashing every few seconds, not the quick, distant kind either. These were full flashes, lighting up everything for a split second like it was daytime. I'd been counting the time between thunder out of habit. Most of it was close, right overhead. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was just another lightning after image in my eyes. One of those spots you get when it's bright enough, but it didn't go away. It stayed in the same place, high up in the clouds, a small, steady glow, not as bright as lightning, not even close, but visible. I stepped a little farther out under the garage overhang, squinting up through the rain. The clouds were moving fast. You could see them shifting, rolling over each other in the flashes, but the light wasn't moving with them. It stayed fixed, like it was behind the clouds or inside them. Another lightning strike hit, close enough that the whole sky lit up. For that split second, I expected the light to disappear in the brightness. It didn't. It was still there. Same position, same steady glow. That's when it started to feel wrong. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my eyes on it. The rain was loud on the roof, loud on the ground, loud everywhere. But that light, it didn't flicker, didn't react, didn't pulse, just stayed there. I went back inside for a second and grabbed my phone, came back out, tried to zoom in. The screen just showed a grainy mess of rain and darkness. The light barely registered. I lowered the phone and looked at it directly again. Still there. Another lightning flash, closer this time. The thunder followed almost immediately. The clouds around the light lit up bright white for a second, and I could see them moving. Clearly. They were sliding past each other, shifting in the wind. But the light stayed locked in place, not drifting, not getting covered or revealed, just fixed. Like it wasn't part of the clouds at all. I felt that slow, uneasy feeling settle in, the kind where your brain keeps trying to come up with normal explanations and none of them stick. Plane didn't make sense, too still, no blinking lights, and it wasn't moving across the sky. Helicopter didn't make sense either. There was no sound beyond the storm, and again, no movement. I stepped out from under the overhang just enough to get a clearer angle. The rain hit harder there. Cold, heavy drops soaking through my shirt almost immediately. I didn't care. I just kept watching it. The light seemed to sharpen slightly. Not brighter, just clearer, like my eyes were adjusting to it. I noticed then that it wasn't perfectly round. There was a slight elongation to it. Subtle. Hard to define. But it wasn't just a dot. Lightning flashed again. This time, it lit up the clouds from underneath. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a darker shape around the light. Not solid, just a faint outline, like the light was part of something larger. Then it was gone. Back to just the glow. I blinked, trying to catch it again. Another flash, same result. The clouds lit up, the light stayed constant. And again, for that brief instant, there was something around it, a shape that didn't match the movement of the clouds. I felt my heartbeat pick up. I took a step back toward the garage. The rain was getting heavier, the wind picking up, but that light didn't shift at all. It didn't sway, didn't drift with the storm, it just stayed there, perfectly still. Time started to stretch a little. I don't know how long I stood there watching. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been 10. The storm kept moving, the clouds kept rolling, lightning kept flashing, and that light stayed fixed in the same exact spot. Then, without warning, everything got brighter, not from lightning, just a sudden increase in the glow of the clouds themselves, like the whole sky had lifted in brightness for a second. The light remained the same, but the contrast around it changed. And in that moment, I saw the shape clearly, just for a split second. A darker area surrounding the light, oval, not huge, but definitely larger than the light itself. Then the brightness dropped back down. The storm returned to normal. The light was still there, same position, same steady glow. I realized I was breathing too fast. I forced myself to slow it down, tried to think, tried to ground it in something normal, but nothing fit. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. No fading, no movement, just not there anymore. The spot where it had been was empty, just clouds and rain. I kept staring at that area, waiting for it to come back. Another lightning flash, nothing. Just normal storm clouds. I stayed outside a little longer. The rain soaked through completely. The thunder rolled on. Everything else stayed the same, but that one point in the sky was just empty now. I went back inside eventually, dried off, sat down, tried to shake it off, but the image stuck. Not just the light, the way it hadn't moved, the way the storm moved around it like it wasn't part of it. And that shape, only visible when everything else lit up, like it had been sitting there the entire time, hidden inside the clouds until the lightning showed just enough of it before it disappeared completely. I was just sitting there waiting for the light to change when the radio cut out. It didn't fade or drift off like bad reception usually does. It just snapped into full static, loud enough that I flinched a little and reached for the volume without thinking. My name's Tyler Green. This was on a regular weeknight. Nothing unusual about it. I was on my way home from work, stopped at a long light on the edge of town where the road meets the highway. There were a couple cars ahead of me, one behind, nothing out of the ordinary. The radio had been playing fine the whole drive. Then suddenly, static. Not soft, not intermittent, just solid, harsh noise filling the car. I turned it down, then off. The static kept going for a second after I hit the button. That's what made me pause. It shouldn't do that. Then it stopped completely. The silence that followed felt a little too sharp, like the inside of the car had emptied out all at once. I glanced at the dashboard. Everything looked normal. No warning lights. Engine idling steady. The red light ahead still holding. I tapped the radio power again. Nothing. Screen stayed blank. I frowned, leaned back in my seat. That's when I noticed how quiet it was outside too. Not completely silent, but muted. The usual background noise, cars in the distance, wind, felt reduced somehow. I looked around. The cars ahead of me were still there, brake lights glowing, no one getting out, no movement, just still. Then I heard a faint sound, not from the car, from outside. A low, almost static-like hiss, very faint, hard to pin down. I turned my head slightly, trying to locate it. It didn't seem to come from any direction, just there. I looked up through the windshield. At first, I didn't see anything, just the usual night sky, a few faint stars, the glow from the streetlights. Then something shifted, not dramatically, just enough to catch my eye. A darker shape moving across the sky, slow, steady. I squinted, leaning forward a bit. It was hard to make out. There were no lights on it, no blinking, no glow. Just a dim outline, like something blocking out the faint light behind it. It moved in a straight line, crossing from left to right. Too smooth to be a plane, too slow to be anything falling. I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. The sound outside, the faint hiss, seemed to line up with it somehow. Not louder, just present. I glanced at the cars ahead again. No one else seemed to notice. No doors opening, no heads sticking out windows, nothing. I looked back up. The object kept moving. Same speed, same direction, no change. As it passed over a slightly brighter patch of sky, I could see it more clearly for a second. Not detailed, but definitely a shape. Not round, not sharp-edged either. something in between, like a soft, uneven outline. Then it moved past that patch and blended back into the darker sky. The radio suddenly clicked. A quick burst of static again. I flinched slightly, looked down at it, still off, still blank. Another burst of static, louder this time. Then silence again. I looked back up. The object was still there, a little farther along now. Still moving, still no lights. I checked the traffic light, still red. It felt like it had been red longer than it should have. I didn't know for sure, but it felt off. I looked at the car ahead of me. The driver's silhouette was visible through the rear window. They weren't moving, just sitting there. The object in the sky kept going. No change in speed, no shift in direction. The faint hiss outside seemed to fade slightly as it moved farther away. I rolled my window down halfway. The air outside felt cooler than I expected. The sound was still there, but weaker now. I leaned slightly toward the opening, like trying to hear it better. Nothing distinct, just that low, almost static-like presence. I looked back up again. The object was nearing the edge of my field of view, still steady, still silent. Then, without any clear transition, it wasn't there anymore. No fading, no sudden movement, just gone. I stared at the empty patch of sky where it had been, waited. Nothing came back. The sound outside faded completely. The normal background noise returned slowly. A car in the distance, wind brushing past. The radio suddenly powered back on by itself. Music came through like nothing had happened. Same song as before, same volume. I jerked my hand toward it, turned it off again. This time, it stayed off. I looked at the traffic light. It turned green. The cars ahead started moving. I hesitated for a second, then followed. The rest of the drive home was normal, too normal. Radio worked fine, no more static, no strange sounds. But I kept glancing up through the windshield, half expecting to see that shape again. There was nothing, just the usual night sky. And the part that stuck with me wasn't just the way it looked. It was how everything else seemed to drop away while it passed overhead, like the sound, the radio, even the sense of time at that intersection. All shifted just slightly, until it was gone, and everything snapped back, as if whatever crossed above me had taken something with it for those few seconds, and then left the rest behind. I was halfway down the block when it happened. My dog, Milo, had stopped to sniff the same patch of grass he always did near the corner, and I was just standing there waiting him out, leash loose in my hand, not really paying attention to anything. It was late, just after 10:30 p.m., and the street was quiet in that normal suburban way. A couple porch lights on, some windows glowing, nothing unusual. Then every light flickered at once, not just one or two, all of them. Porch lights, street lights, even the faint ones coming through windows. It lasted maybe half a second, but it was perfectly synced, like someone had flipped a switch for the entire block. Milo stopped sniffing immediately. He lifted his head, ears up, completely still. I remember looking around, waiting for something else to happen. At first, nothing did. The lights stayed on after that. Everything went back to normal, except it didn't feel normal. The air felt thinner, not physically, just in that way where something changes and you can't quite explain it. Milo didn't move. He just stood there, staring down the street, toward the far end of the block. I followed his gaze. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was someone walking with a flashlight behind a house or something, a faint glow rising just above the roofline. But it didn't behave like a light should. It moved too smoothly, too steadily, and there was no beam, just a soft, pale orb. It came up slowly from behind the houses at the end of the street. Not fast, not slow enough to feel natural either, just controlled. I felt my grip tighten on the leash without thinking. Milo didn't bark, didn't growl, he just stood there, locked in place, watching. The orb cleared the rooftops and hovered there for a second, maybe 20, 30 feet above them. It wasn't bright, it didn't light anything up around it. The houses beneath it stayed in shadow, but the orb itself was clearly visible, like it had its own separate presence from everything else. I took a few steps forward, without really deciding to, just drawn closer. The street stayed quiet, no cars, no people, no doors opening. It felt like I was the only one seeing it. I glanced at the houses around me, windows still lit, TV flickering in one of them, but no movement, no one else coming outside. I looked back at the orb. It hadn't changed position, still hovering. Still silent. There was no sound at all, not even the usual background noise, no wind, no distant traffic, just a kind of absence. I noticed Milo's body had gone stiff, not tense like he was about to react, just fixed, like he'd frozen in place. I crouched down and touched his back. He felt normal, warm, but he didn't respond, didn't even look at me. His eyes stayed locked on the orb. I stood back up slowly. The orb shifted then, just slightly, not moving across the sky, more like adjusting its position. A small, smooth glide to the left. Then it stopped again. I felt something in my chest tighten. Not fear exactly, more like anticipation. Like something was about to happen, but I didn't know what. I looked at the streetlights. They hadn't flickered again, but their light felt dimmer now. Or maybe it was just the way the orb stood out against them. I couldn't tell. The orb moved again, this time upward, very slowly, rising higher above the rooftops. Still no sound, still no change in brightness. It just climbed. I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to inhale. The air felt normal, but the silence stayed. Milo finally shifted slightly, not a full movement, just a small step forward, like he was trying to follow it. I pulled gently on the leash. He resisted for a second, then stopped again. The orb reached a higher point and hovered, same as before. Perfectly still. I waited, watching, trying to figure out what I was looking at. A drone didn't make sense. Too quiet, too steady, and it didn't have the usual blinking lights. This was just one pale sphere. Then, without warning, it started moving sideways, faster this time. Not fast like a plane, but faster than before. A smooth glide across the sky, parallel to the street. I turned my head to follow it. Milo's body shifted with it like he was tracking it too. The orb passed over the line of houses, maintaining the same height, same speed, same steady glow, no sound, no trail, nothing left behind. It moved across the entire block, and then as it reached the far side, it just faded. Not instantly, but quickly, like it was dimming itself, until it was gone. The sky went back to normal, stars visible again, darkness settling in where it had been. The sound came back right after, subtle at first, a distant car, the faint rustle of leaves, then everything else, like the world had resumed. Milo shook himself suddenly, like he'd snapped out of something. He looked up at me, confused, tail low. Then he pulled gently on the leash, wanting to keep walking. I stood there for a few more seconds, staring at the empty sky, trying to make sense of it. Nothing else happened. No lights, no movement. Just a normal night again. I walked Milo back home, didn't see anything else on the way, didn't hear anything unusual. Everything felt ordinary, except for that moment. The flicker, the silence, and the way that thing had risen up from behind the houses like it had been there the whole time, just out of sight, waiting, until everything on the street blinked before showing itself. I woke up because Milo was growling. Not barking, not whining, just this low, steady sound I'd never heard from him before. At first, I thought he was dreaming or reacting to something outside, but when I opened my eyes, he was sitting upright at the foot of the bed, completely still, staring straight up at the ceiling. My name's Kevin Marsh. I live alone in a small 2-story house, nothing fancy. Milo's a lab mix, about 5 years old, usually pretty relaxed. He barks at the door sometimes, or if someone walks too close to the fence, but I'd never heard him make a sound like that. It was around 3 in the morning. I remember checking my phone right after I woke up, 3:08 a.m. The room was dark, except for this faint light I couldn't immediately place. It wasn't coming from outside, it wasn't streetlight or passing headlights. It was softer than that, more even. I pushed myself up on one elbow and looked around. That's when I noticed it. The glow was coming from the attic hatch. It's one of those square panels in the ceiling with a pull-down ladder. Mine stays closed all the time. There's no reason to go up there. But now, around the edges of it, there was a thin line of pale light. Not bright enough to fully light the room, but enough that I could see the outline clearly. Milo's growling got a little louder, still low, still steady. I sat up slowly, keeping my eyes on the hatch. Nothing moved. The light didn't flicker. It just stayed there like something was on the other side. I remember thinking maybe I'd left something plugged in up there, but that didn't make sense. There's no power outlets in my attic. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Milo shifted slightly, his body tense, but he didn't take his eyes off the ceiling. "Hey," I said quietly, more to myself than him. No response, obviously. I stood up. The floor felt cold under my feet. The room was quiet in that way it gets late at night, where every small sound stands out. Except now there was something else, a faint noise. At first, I thought it was just my ears adjusting, but the longer I stood there, the more I noticed it. A soft, almost electrical hum, very low. Not coming from any appliance I could identify. It seemed to come from above, from the attic. I took a step toward the center of the room, directly under the hatch. The glow didn't change. Still thin, still contained to the edges. Milo's growl shifted slightly in tone, like he was reacting to me moving closer. I stopped, looked up. The hatch itself wasn't open. It was fully closed, flush with the ceiling. But the light around it made it look like something on the other side was brighter than the room I was standing in. The hum got just a little more noticeable. Still quiet, but now I was sure it wasn't coming from anywhere else. I reached up slowly, like I was going to touch the panel. Then I stopped halfway. Something about it didn't feel right. Not fear exactly, just hesitation, like I shouldn't. I lowered my hand, stood there for another few seconds. Nothing changed. Then Milo let out a short, sharp breath, almost like a warning. Not a bark, just a sudden shift in his breathing. I looked back at him. His eyes were wide, fixed on the same spot. I turned back to the hatch. The light seemed slightly brighter now, not by much, just enough that I noticed. The edges of the panel were more defined, the line of light a little thicker, the hum deepened slightly, still not loud, but more present. I took a step back, then another. I don't know why, but I didn't want to be directly under it anymore. As I moved away, the light didn't follow or change direction. It stayed centered on the hatch. I backed up until I was near the door. Milo stayed where he was, still growling. Then, without any kind of build-up, the light went out, not dimmed, not faded, just gone. The room dropped back into full darkness. The hum stopped at the same moment. Complete silence. Milo's growling cut off instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there, not moving, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. After a few seconds, Milo relaxed slightly, still alert, but not tense like before. I turned on the bedside lamp. The normal yellow light filled the room. I looked up at the hatch. It looked exactly like it always did. Closed. No gaps, no light, no sign that anything had been different. I waited a minute, then another. Still nothing. I grabbed a chair from the corner of the room and dragged it under the hatch. Milo watched me, quiet now but still focused. I climbed up slowly, reached up, pressed against the panel. It didn't feel warm, didn't feel different at all, just the same solid surface. I hesitated for a second, then pulled the cord. The ladder unfolded with the usual creak. I stood there, looking up into the dark opening. No light, no sound. Just the attic, empty and still. I grabbed a flashlight from the dresser and shined it up. Boxes, insulation, nothing out of place, nothing that could have caused what I'd just seen. I climbed up halfway, enough to get a better look. The air up there felt normal, dry, still, no sign of anything unusual. After a minute, I climbed back down and folded the ladder back up, closed the hatch, turned off the lamp, went back to bed. Milo jumped up beside me, but he didn't settle like usual. He stayed sitting, facing the ceiling, not growling anymore, just watching. I didn't sleep much after that. And every so often, I'd catch myself looking up at that hatch, expecting to see that thin line of light again, and wondering how long it had been there before Milo noticed, and what exactly had been on the other side of it, when the rest of the house was completely dark. I noticed it because it didn't belong there. I'd stopped along the trail to take a break, just below a ridge that overlooked a wide valley. It was early afternoon, clear sky, no haze, the kind of day where you can see for miles without anything getting washed out. My name's Daniel Cross. I'd been hiking that trail for a few years. Not constantly, but enough to know what the landscape looked like at different times of day. That ridge line ahead of me was familiar, and there had never been anything hovering above it before. At first, I thought it was just glare, something catching the sunlight at the right angle. But it didn't shift when I moved, didn't fade when I blinked. It stayed fixed, a bright point just above the ridge. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure out what I was looking at. Then I reached into my pack and pulled out my binoculars. I kept them for spotting wildlife mostly, but they worked well enough for anything at a distance. I raised them slowly and focused on the ridge. The object came into view immediately, and the first thing that hit me was how clean it looked. Perfectly round, not kind of round, not distorted by distance or heat shimmer, just a solid, even circle. Bright, but not blinding. More like it reflected light evenly across its surface. There were no markings, no seams, no shadows, nothing to suggest depth or structure, just a flat, uniform brightness. I adjusted the focus slightly. It didn't change. Still perfectly smooth, still perfectly round. I lowered the binoculars for a second, looked at it with my eyes alone. It went back to being just a small bright point. Raised the binoculars again. Same perfect circle, same position, hovering just above the ridgeline. I checked the sky around it. Clear. No clouds, no birds passing through. Nothing that would distort or obscure it. I scanned left and right. Nothing else unusual. Just that one object. I looked down at my watch. 1:22 p.m. I figured I'd sit for a bit and watch it. Maybe it would move. Maybe it was a drone or something that would shift position. So I sat down on a rock, kept the binoculars in my lap. Every couple minutes, I'd lift them and check again. The object didn't move. Not even slightly. It stayed in the exact same position relative to the ridge. No drift, no wobble, no sign of wind affecting it. After about 20 minutes, I started to feel that slow unease. The kind that builds when something doesn't behave the way it should. Even something hovering should shift a little, adjust, react to air currents. This didn't. It was like it was anchored to a point in the sky. I stood up and walked a little farther along the trail, changed my angle slightly, looked again, still in the same place, same height above the ridge, same size, same brightness. The perspective changed around it, the slope of the ridge, the line of trees, but the object stayed fixed relative to the horizon. I sat back down, kept watching. Time passed. I checked my watch again. 2:05. Over 40 minutes, no change. I took a drink from my water bottle, tried to think of normal explanations, weather balloon maybe, but it didn't look right. No visible tether, no slight sway, and the shape was too perfect. I raised the binoculars again, focused carefully. The surface didn't reflect the surroundings the way something metallic would. It wasn't mirroring the sky or the ground, it was just evenly bright, like it generated its own uniform tone. I noticed something else then. There was no distortion around it, no heat shimmer, no ripple in the air. Everything around it looked completely normal, except for the object itself. I lowered the binoculars again and rubbed my eyes, looked back up, still there, exactly the same. A couple hours passed like that. I didn't move much, just stayed on that stretch of trail, watching, checking the time, checking the object. Nothing changed. At one point, a bird flew across the valley, well below the ridge. I tracked it for a second, then looked back at the object. Still there, untouched by anything around it. By around 3:30, the sun had shifted enough that the light across the ridge had changed. Shadows moved, the colors of the rock deepened slightly. The object didn't change at all. Same brightness, same appearance. It didn't react to the changing light. I stood up again, stretched my legs, considered moving closer. The trail did wind up toward that ridge eventually, but it was a long climb, and something about the idea of getting closer didn't sit right. Not fear exactly, just hesitation. I stayed where I was, watched a little longer. Then, sometime after 4, I checked my watch first. 4:07. I remember that clearly. I looked back up through the binoculars. The object was gone. No fading, no movement, just gone. The space where it had been was empty, just sky and the ridgeline. I lowered the binoculars slowly, looked with my eyes, nothing there. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to process it. Then I raised the binoculars again, scanned the entire ridge. Left, right, above. Nothing, no sign of it anywhere. I stayed there for another 10 minutes, just in case it came back. It didn't. The rest of the hike felt normal, too normal. The sky stayed clear, the valley looked the same, nothing else unusual. But that spot, that exact position above the ridge, stayed empty. And the part that stuck with me wasn't just how long it stayed there, it was how it didn't move at all. For hours. Like it wasn't floating or flying, just existing in that one place until it decided not to be there anymore. I only noticed it when I got home. Up until then, the night had been completely normal. My name's Lucas Hargreaves. I shoot long-ex photos as a hobby, mostly out in quiet places where there's not much light pollution. That night, I'd driven out to this stretch of farmland about 20 minutes from town. Open sky, low horizon, nothing but fields and a few distant tree lines. It was cold, clear, and still. No wind, no clouds, just a clean sky with a decent spread of stars. I set up my tripod near a fence line, pointed the camera north, and started taking exposures. 30 seconds at a time, sometimes a minute, just letting the sensor pick up whatever it could. Nothing unusual. Planes crossed now and then, easy to spot, slow blinking lights leaving faint dotted lines across the frame. I usually wait for those to pass, but sometimes I let them go through just to see how they look. That night, though, I didn't see much air traffic. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but that's normal out there. Around 11:40 p.m., I remember checking the sky again before starting another exposure. Just a habit. I always look up first, make sure there's nothing obvious that'll mess up the shot. There was nothing. No planes. No satellites I could see. Just stars. I hit the shutter and stepped back, stood there with my hands in my pockets, waiting for the exposure to finish. The camera made that faint clicking sound when it closed. I checked the preview screen. Looked fine, same as the others. I took a few more shots after that, slightly different angles, same settings. Packed everything up around midnight and headed home. Didn't think anything of it. It wasn't until I sat down at my computer to go through the photos that something felt off. Most of the shots looked exactly how I expected. Clean star fields, a couple with faint trails from distant planes. Nothing unusual. Then I opened one frame taken at 11:43 p.m. and immediately paused. At first I thought it was a glitch. The image was filled with lines. Not random noise or streaking from camera shake. Actual, clean, straight lines. Dozens of them, running parallel across the entire frame. Bright, thin streaks of light, evenly spaced, all moving in the same direction. They weren't dotted like airplane trails, they were solid, continuous, like something had moved across the sky very quickly while the shutter was open. But there were too many, way too many. I leaned closer to the screen, zoomed in. Each streak was uniform. Same thickness, same brightness, no variation, and they all lined up perfectly, like a pattern. I sat back for a second, trying to process it. I went back to the previous image, taken about a minute earlier. Nothing, just stars. I went forward to the next one, also normal. No streaks, no lines, just that one frame. I zoomed in again on the strange one. The streaks didn't blur or fade at the edges. They were sharp, defined, like they'd been drawn across the image. But that didn't make sense. I hadn't seen anything. If something that bright had moved across the sky, I would have noticed, even in my peripheral vision, even for a second. But I hadn't. I was standing right there the whole time. I went back through the rest of the images just to be sure. Nothing else like it, only that one. I checked the metadata, same exposure time, same settings, no difference. I zoomed into the stars behind the streaks. Some of them were partially obscured where the lines passed over them, which meant the streaks were captured during the exposure, not added later. I remember sitting there, staring at it longer than I should have, trying to come up with a normal explanation. Maybe a flock of birds catching light, but at that altitude, in that formation, and that evenly spaced, didn't make sense. Maybe some kind of reflection? But there was nothing in front of the lens. No glass, no surface to reflect off, and the lines were too consistent, too precise. I went back to the original memory card and reloaded the file. Same result. I even opened it on a different program, just in case. Still there. I looked at the time again, 11:43 p.m. I tried to remember exactly what I was doing at that moment. I'd been standing behind the camera, looking up occasionally, nothing unusual. No sudden lights, no sounds, nothing. But then I remembered something small, something I hadn't thought about at the time. There had been a moment, very, very brief, where everything felt quieter. Not silent, just muted. Like the background noise dropped slightly. I'd barely registered it. It lasted maybe a second or two. I'd assumed it was just my ears adjusting or the wind dying down. But now, looking at the timestamp, it lined up almost exactly with that exposure. I went back to the image again, studied the streaks. They all ran in the same direction, perfectly parallel, no deviation. Like whatever caused them moved as a group, or was a single structure moving very fast. I checked the angle, compared it to the horizon. They weren't aligned with anything natural. Not the stars, not the ground, just their own direction. I zoomed out, looked at the full image again. It didn't look like something passing through the sky. It looked like something passing between me and the sky, close enough to block light, but far enough to stay completely silent. I sat there for a long time just staring at it, trying to decide if I was overthinking it. But the more I looked, the less it felt like a mistake. It felt like something had been there for the length of that exposure and nowhere else. I went outside after that, just stood in my yard, looking up. Same sky, same stars, nothing unusual, no lines, no movement, just empty space. But I kept thinking about how I hadn't seen anything at the time, and how that image showed something that had to have been there, right above me, moving fast enough to leave dozens of perfect lines, without making a sound, without giving any sign, except for that one frame where it showed up and then disappeared again like it had never crossed the sky at all. I first noticed it near the tip of my line. I was sitting in the middle of the lake, just drifting, not really expecting to catch anything. It was late evening, that time where the sky's still holding some light, but everything around you starts going quiet. My name's Darren Holt. I'd taken the boat out alone, like I usually did after work when I wanted some space. This lake's a couple miles outside town, nothing special about it. Small, shallow in places, deeper toward the center where I was. The water had been calm all evening. Not glassy, but close. Just small ripples from the breeze. I remember leaning forward slightly, watching the line, when I saw something faint under the surface. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the sky shifting. A weird angle of light. But it didn't move the way reflections do. It stayed in one place, right below the line. I narrowed my eyes, leaned closer over the side of the boat. The water looked off. Not murky, not clear, just slightly tinted. A very faint green. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I lifted my head and looked around. The rest of the water looked normal. Dark, almost black in the deeper parts. Only that small patch near my line had that color. I reached over and reeled in a bit, just to see if something was causing it. The line came up clean. Nothing on the hook. When I dropped it back in, the glow was still there. Same spot, same faint color. I sat back slowly, scanning the water around me. The glow started to spread. Not fast, not dramatic, just slowly widening, like something underneath was expanding outward. I watched it move past the side of the boat. The green tint followed the surface, not deep below it. It stayed close to the top, like a thin layer. I leaned over again, this time more carefully. There was no visible source. No fish, no plants, no movement beneath the surface. Just that color. And then I noticed something else. The sound, or lack of it. The lake had been quiet before, but now it felt different. The small lapping of water against the boat had faded. The distant insects along the shore seemed quieter. Even the wind felt like it had dropped. I sat there, listening. The silence wasn't complete. Just reduced, like everything had been turned down slightly. The green glow kept spreading. It passed under the boat completely, moving outward in all directions. I stood up slowly, trying not to rock the boat too much. Looked over the edge. The glow was forming a shape now. A circle. Centered right around me. Perfectly even. I could see the edge of it clearly where the water went from normal dark to that faint green. It stretched out maybe 30 or 40 feet from the boat in every direction. I turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The entire area around me was surrounded by this dim glowing ring, and the water outside of it, completely normal. The boundary was sharp. Too sharp, like someone had drawn a line in the lake. I swallowed, suddenly very aware of how far I was from shore. Not far enough to panic, but far enough that swimming back wouldn't be quick. I grabbed the oar and dipped it into the water. As soon as it crossed that boundary, the glow didn't react. No ripple, no disturbance, just stayed exactly the same. I lifted the oar back out. Water dripped off it like normal. No color on it. Nothing unusual. I sat back down slowly. The glow wasn't getting brighter, just steady, consistent. I looked down again, trying to see if there was anything moving beneath it. Nothing. No shapes. No shadows. Just that faint, even light. And then there was a sound. Very low. Almost below hearing. More something I felt than heard. A kind of soft vibration. It seemed to come from the water itself, not loud enough to be clear. Just present. I rested my hand against the side of the boat. I could feel it there too. A slight hum, not enough to shake anything, just enough to notice. I looked around again. Still alone. No other boats, no lights from shore aimed this way. Just me, in the middle of this circle. I checked my phone out of instinct. No signal. That wasn't unusual for that area, but it still stood out in the moment. I don't know how long I sat there. It couldn't have been more than a minute or two, but it felt longer. The glow stayed exactly the same. The circle didn't grow or shrink. The hum didn't get louder. Everything just held. Then, without any warning, it started to fade. Not all at once. The edge of the circle softened first. The sharp boundary blurred. The green dimmed slightly. I leaned forward again, watching closely. The glow pulled back, slowly shrinking toward the center. Like whatever had spread out was reversing itself. The circle got smaller, closer, until it was just around the boat again, then smaller still. Back to that same patch near where my line had been, and then nothing. The water went completely dark again. Normal. The faint hum disappeared with it. The sounds of the lake came back. The small ripples against the hull, the insects on the shore, the breeze, all at once. I sat there for a few seconds, not moving, just staring at the spot where the glow had been. Then I reached for the oar and pushed away slightly just to move. The water reacted normally. No color, no resistance. Nothing. I reeled in my line, packed up my gear without really thinking about it, started the motor and headed back toward shore. The whole way back, I kept looking over the side, watching the water, half expecting to see it again. But there was nothing, just the dark surface of the lake, flat and ordinary. And the part that stayed with me wasn't just the way it looked, it was how precise it had been. That perfect circle, like something had marked out a space around me. Held it there for a moment, and then let it go, without leaving any sign it had ever been there at all. I noticed it about 20 minutes into the run. At first, I thought it was just a reflection. My name's Colin Mercer. I've been running freight routes for a little over 11 years now. That night, I was on a long haul through a stretch of open countryside, mostly flat, fields and scattered trees, nothing built up for miles. It was late, around 1:30 in the morning. Clear sky, no clouds, decent visibility, even without much moonlight. I was alone in the cab, just the usual hum of the engine and the tracks under me. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then I caught something off to the right. A light. Bright, steady, white. It was low on the horizon at first, just sitting there. I remember thinking it might be a tower light, or maybe a vehicle out on a distant road. But as the train moved forward, the angle didn't change the way it should have. It stayed in the same relative position, not falling behind, not getting closer, just pacing me. I leaned forward slightly, looking through the side of the windshield. The light wasn't flickering, no blinking like an aircraft, no color change, just a clean, steady white. I checked the speed, 48 miles per hour, standard for that section. I looked back at the light, still there. Same height, same distance as far as I could tell. I sat there watching it for a few minutes, tried to ignore it, but the longer it stayed, the harder it was to explain. If it was a car, it would have changed position. If it was a tower, I would have passed it. If it was an aircraft, there'd be movement, blinking, something. This didn't do any of that. It just kept pace. I reached over and picked up the radio, called it in casually, not making a big deal out of it. "Dispatch, you got anything out here running parallel to me?" There was a pause, then the usual response. "No known traffic in your area." I looked back at the light, still there. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "I've got a visual on something off my right side, bright white, holding position." Another pause. "Nothing on radar," dispatch came back. "You sure it's not a ground vehicle?" I didn't answer right away, just watched it. "No," I said finally, "too steady." They didn't push it further, just told me to report if anything changed. I set the radio back down, kept my eyes on the track ahead, but I kept checking the light every few seconds. It stayed with me, minute after minute. The terrain changed slightly as I moved along. Fields gave way to a line of trees, then back to open land. The light didn't react to any of it. It passed behind nothing, didn't get blocked, didn't shift position. It just stayed exactly where it was, like it wasn't tied to the ground at all. After about 15 minutes, I started noticing something else. The sound in the cab felt off, not gone, just different. The usual rhythm of the train was still there, but the higher-pitched background noise, the subtle stuff, seemed reduced, like something was dampening it. I tapped the side panel lightly. Sounded normal, but the overall feel of the cab had changed. I checked the instruments. Everything looked fine. No drops, no fluctuations. Speed steady, engine steady. I looked back at the light. Still pacing me. Same brightness, same distance. I leaned slightly to the right, trying to get a better angle. For a second, I thought I saw more than just a point of light, like there was something around it. Not a shape exactly, just a faint distortion, like heat shimmer, but sharper. I blinked and it was gone. Back to just the light. I rubbed my eyes, looked again, still there, unchanged. Time kept passing. I checked the mile markers. By then, it had been with me for at least 30 miles, maybe more. No change, no variation, just matching my speed exactly. I picked up the radio again. Dispatch, you still not seeing anything? Negative, they said. Airspace is clear, nothing tracked. I didn't respond, just set the radio down again. My hands felt tighter on the controls than usual. Not panic, just tension. The kind that builds when something doesn't make sense for too long. I glanced at the sky ahead. Empty. No stars blocked, no movement. Then I looked back to the right again. The light was slightly closer, not by much, but enough that I noticed. I leaned forward. Tried to judge the distance. It was hard. There was no reference point, but it felt nearer than before. Still matching my speed, still silent. I checked the instruments again. Everything still normal, but that feeling in the cab, the slightly dampened sound, was stronger now. I could hear the train, but it felt like I was hearing it through something, like there was a layer between me and everything else. I didn't like that. I kept my eyes forward for a bit, trying to focus on the track. When I looked back again, the light was closer, definitely closer, still off to the right, still at the same height, but no longer distant. Now it felt like it was just beyond the edge of the field, and that faint distortion around it, I could see it more clearly now. The air around the light didn't look right. It bent slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough that the background didn't line up perfectly. I swallowed, adjusted my grip. The train kept moving. Same speed, same direction. The light stayed with me. Then, without any buildup, it stopped. Not gradually, not slowing. It just stopped, held perfectly still in the air. And for the first time, the distance between us started to change. I was moving away from it now. The light stayed in place. I watched it shrink slowly as the train carried me forward. The sound in the cab returned to normal almost immediately. That dampened feeling lifted. Everything sounded right again. I kept watching it through the side window as long as I could. It got smaller, fainter. Then, just before it would have dropped out of view completely, it shot straight up. Not at an angle, not drifting. Straight up. Fast enough that I almost missed it. 1 second it was there. The next it was gone. No trail, no fade, just gone. I sat there for a long time after that, just staring at the empty sky where it had been. The rest of the run was uneventful. Everything worked fine. Nothing else showed up. But when I checked the logs later, there was nothing. No radar contact, no recorded anomaly, no mention of anything in that stretch of track. Just a normal run, same as every other night, except for that one light that stayed with me for miles, matched me perfectly, and then left like it had been keeping pace on purpose until it decided not to anymore. I noticed it because the stars started going out. Not all at once, one at a time, like something was passing in front of them. I was sitting on my back porch, just leaning back in one of those plastic chairs, half awake, half not. It was late, probably around 11:45 or so. Quiet night, warm but not humid, no wind. The kind of night where sound carries, but there wasn't much to carry. My name's Eric Dalton. I live on the edge of a small neighborhood, right where the houses thin out and it turns into open fields. My backyard faces that direction, so you get a decent view of the sky when it's clear. That night was clear. No clouds at all. I'd been sitting out there for maybe 20 minutes, just looking up, not really thinking about anything. Then I saw one of the stars blink out. I didn't react right away. Stars disappear sometimes when you're not looking directly at them or your eyes shift. It's normal. But then another one went out, same area, same kind of sudden disappearance. I leaned forward a bit, focusing on that patch of sky. Another one vanished, then another. That's when it clicked that something was moving, not fast, slow, and not glowing. Whatever it was darker than the sky itself. It didn't block light in a sharp way either. The edges were soft, like the stars weren't being covered, just erased as it passed over them. I stood up slowly, my eyes tracking the movement. The shape was massive. I couldn't see it directly. Not like an object. There were no lights, no outline, just the absence of stars where it moved. And it kept going, steady, straight across the sky. I remember thinking it had to be a cloud. That was the only thing that made sense. But there were no other clouds anywhere. The rest of the sky was completely clear. And this thing didn't look like a cloud. No texture, no variation, just a uniform darkness that slid across the stars. I stepped off the porch and into the yard, trying to get a wider view. The ground felt still under my feet, too still. That's when I noticed the silence. It had been quiet before, but now it felt deeper. The usual background sounds, the distant hum of traffic, a dog barking somewhere far off, they were gone, not reduced, gone. I stood there, listening. Nothing. Not even the faint rustle of leaves. I looked back up. The shape was still moving, now directly overhead. I tried to follow its edges, but they were hard to define. It didn't have a clear boundary, just a gradual shift from star-filled sky to empty darkness. I felt this low, almost pressure-like sensation in my ears. Not painful, just there, like the air had thickened slightly. I swallowed, rubbed the side of my head. The feeling didn't go away. I kept watching. The thing didn't change speed, didn't adjust direction, just kept gliding. I realized then how big it had to be. It wasn't passing quickly like a plane. It was taking its time, covering a huge portion of the sky. And still no sound. No engine noise, no wind disturbance, nothing. I checked the horizon line briefly. Still clear. No lights moving up there, nothing rising or falling, just that one dark shape above me. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt longer than it probably was, maybe a minute, maybe two. But it stretched out, each second feeling slower than the last. The pressure in my ears deepened slightly. I noticed my breathing had changed too, shallower, without me meaning to. I forced myself to take a deeper breath. The air felt normal going in, just the sensation around me that felt off. Then I saw something else. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I could see structure within it, not clearly. Not shapes I could describe. Just a faint variation in the darkness, like layers moving within it. But as soon as I focused on it, it smoothed out again. Back to that uniform absence. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again, nothing but the moving void where stars should have been. Then, as it reached the far side of the sky, the stars started coming back. One by one, reappearing in its wake, exactly where they should have been. No shift, no distortion, just back. The silence lifted at the same time, slowly. The distant sounds returned first, then the closer ones. A faint breeze moved through the trees behind me. I hadn't even realized it had stopped. The pressure in my ears faded. I stood there for a few more seconds, watching the last of the darkness slide off the edge of the sky, and then it was gone. The sky looked normal again. Full of stars, no gaps, no sign anything had passed through. I stayed out there longer than I meant to, just staring up, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually I went back inside, closed the door. But before I turned off the porch light, I looked up one more time. The sky was exactly the same as it had been before. And that's what didn't sit right. Because whatever moved over me had been big enough to block out a huge part of it. And silent enough that I never would have known it was there, if it hadn't taken the stars with it while it passed. I first noticed it in the reflection. I was driving north on a stretch of highway that runs alongside a long, shallow reservoir. It's one of those roads where there's nothing for miles. No streetlights, no houses, just flat land and water off to one side. My name's Daniel Reeves. I was coming back from a late job, nothing unusual, just running later than I planned. It was sometime after midnight, maybe closer to 1. I hadn't passed another car in at least 15 minutes. The road was straight, and the surface of the water to my right was almost perfectly still. It acted like a mirror when the wind died down like that. I wasn't really paying attention to it at first, just driving, radio low, thinking about getting home. Then I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A light. It was faint, but it stood out against the dark reflection of the sky on the water. At first, I thought it was just a star reflecting, but it wasn't where it should have been. It was directly above the reflection of my headlights, like it was positioned over my car. I glanced at it again, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The light stayed perfectly aligned with my car's reflection as I moved. Same distance, same position. That didn't make sense. Reflections shift when you move, even distant ones. This one didn't. I leaned forward slightly, looking out over the water. The surface was smooth enough that I could clearly see the road behind me in it, my taillights stretching out in a long red line, and above that, that single pale light. It wasn't flickering. It wasn't moving independently. It was locked in place over my reflection. I felt that slow, creeping confusion start to settle in. I looked up through the windshield. The sky was empty. No stars directly overhead, just darkness. I checked the side mirror. Same thing, nothing in the sky. But when I looked back at the water, the light was still there. I slowed down a little without thinking. The car dropped from about 60 to maybe 45. The light in the reflection didn't change position. It stayed exactly above the mirrored image of my car, like it was attached to it. I tapped the brakes lightly. Same thing, no shift, no lag, just perfectly fixed. I sat there for a second, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe something on the car, a reflection off the roof. But it didn't match that either. The angle was wrong, and it was too far above the reflection. I turned the radio off. The silence made it easier to focus. The only sound was the tires on the road, a low, steady hum. I kept driving, kept watching the water. The light stayed with me, mile after mile. I passed one of the small roadside signs marking distance. I barely noticed the number. My attention kept going back to that reflection. I tried looking up again. Nothing. No light, no aircraft, no drone, nothing I could see. I rolled my window down. Cold air came in, sharp against my face. I leaned slightly toward the opening, looking up along the side of the car. Still nothing. The sky was empty. I pulled back in and looked at the water again. The light hadn't moved. If anything, it looked a little brighter now. Not by much. Just enough that I could make out a slightly more defined edge to it. It wasn't perfectly round, more like a soft oval, but still faint, still subtle. I felt that tightness in my chest again. Not panic, just the awareness that something wasn't lining up. I kept driving. Another few minutes passed. Then I noticed something else. The reflection of the road itself started to look off. It took me a second to understand what I was seeing. The edges of the reflection weren't as sharp anymore, like the water had started to ripple. But when I looked directly at the surface, it was still calm. No visible movement, just that slight distortion in the reflected image. The light above my reflection didn't distort at all. It stayed clean, sharp compared to everything else. I slowed down further, down to maybe 30 now. My foot hovered over the brake. I was thinking about pulling over, but there wasn't really a shoulder, just a narrow strip of gravel before the drop toward the water. I didn't like the idea of stopping out there. I kept going. The light stayed with me. Then, for a moment, it shifted, just slightly, not away from the reflection, but upward, like it lifted a few inches above where it had been. I froze, hands tight on the wheel. Then it settled back into place, right above the reflection again, like it had corrected itself. I exhaled slowly, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. I looked up one more time. The sky was still empty, no sound, no movement, nothing. I looked back at the water. The light was still there, still following. I don't know how long that went on. It felt like a long time, but it was probably only 10 minutes. Then I reached the end of the reservoir. The road curved slightly away, and the water disappeared behind a low embankment. The reflection vanished, and with it, the light. I kept driving, eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. Part of me expected to see it behind me somehow. There was nothing, just darkness. Empty road. I drove another few miles before I pulled over at a proper turnout. Gravel lot, nothing around. I shut the engine off and stepped out. The air was colder out there, still. I looked up at the sky, clear, stars scattered everywhere, but nothing directly above me. No unusual lights, no movement. I walked a few steps away from the car, looking around, trying to get my bearings. The reservoir was out of sight now. No reflection, no reference point, just open sky. I stood there for a minute, maybe two, waiting, listening. Nothing happened. Eventually I got back in the car and drove the rest of the way home. Everything worked fine. No issues with the engine, no problems with the electronics. The radio came back on like normal, but the whole drive after that, I kept checking any reflective surface I passed. Windows, puddles, anything. half expecting to see that same light sitting exactly where it shouldn't be, perfectly aligned with me, but nowhere in the sky above. I noticed it before I realized anything was wrong. I was on a narrow back road cutting through farmland, about 20 minutes outside a town called Millridge. It was that time just before dawn where the sky starts to lighten, but everything on the ground still feels like night. My name's Aaron Pike. I'd been driving since around 3 a.m., heading back from helping a friend move. I was tired, but not dangerously tired. Just quiet, focused on the road. There weren't any streetlights out there, just the occasional farmhouse way off in the distance. I saw the light off to my right. It was over a field. Bright white, not huge, maybe the size of a distant floodlight. It wasn't moving, just hanging there, maybe 20 or 30 feet above the ground. At first, I thought it was someone's equipment, farm machinery maybe, but something about it didn't fit. It was too clean, too isolated, no other lights around it, no visible structure. I kept driving, glancing at it every few seconds. That's when I noticed the shift. It didn't move like something drifting or being carried by wind, it just changed position. 1 second, it was slightly left of a tree line. The next time I looked, it was a little higher, then a little to the right. No in-between motion, no smooth transition, just different placements each time I saw it, like I was missing the frames in between. I slowed down a bit, trying to focus on it more carefully. Every few seconds, it would be somewhere else, not far, just enough that it couldn't be my perspective shifting. I checked the road, then looked back. It had moved again. Same brightness, same shape, no flicker, just relocated. I felt that slow, creeping unease start to build. I rolled down my window. Cold air rushed in, the kind that wakes you up immediately. I leaned slightly toward the opening, trying to get a clearer angle. The light stayed perfectly steady while I was looking at it directly. Then I glanced back at the road, looked back again, and it had shifted, a few feet lower this time. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. I blinked a couple times, rubbed one eye, looked again. The light held its position for a few seconds. Then, without any visible movement, it was somewhere else. A little farther back in the field. Like it had stepped backward. I slowed down even more, down to maybe 25. There was no one else on the road, no headlights behind me, no traffic coming the other way, just me, the car, and that light. I started thinking about pulling over. Part of me didn't want to. It felt like the kind of thing you just drive past and forget about. But I couldn't stop looking at it. Every time it changed position, it felt more deliberate, not random, like it was choosing where to be. I passed a break in the fence line where I could see deeper into the field. The ground was flat, open. No equipment, no buildings, nothing that could explain it. Just that light. I eased the car onto the gravel shoulder and stopped. The engine idled quietly. For a second, I just sat there, hands still on the wheel. Looking out across the field, the light hovered there, unchanged. I reached over and turned the radio off. The silence filled the car immediately. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The air was colder than I expected, damp. There was a faint smell of soil and grass. I closed the door behind me without taking my eyes off the light. It stayed in place. I took a few steps away from the car, gravel crunching under my shoes. The sound felt louder than it should have. I stopped and just watched. The light held steady for a few seconds. Then it shifted. A little higher, no movement, just a different position. I felt my stomach tighten. Seeing it from outside the car made it worse somehow. More real. I took another step forward. The light didn't react, didn't change brightness, didn't flicker. It just stayed there, then shifted again, a little closer to the center of the field, like it was repositioning itself. I looked around, half expecting to see something else. Another light. A person. Anything. There was nothing, just open land and that single, quiet glow. I looked back at it. It hadn't moved. For a few seconds, it stayed exactly where it was, longer than before. I started to think maybe it had stopped. Then I blinked and it was lower, closer to the ground now. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. I stepped back toward the car a little, not fully turning away, just enough to feel the edge of the door behind me. The light shifted again, this time slightly to the left. Still no motion, still no sound, just a new position. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how exposed I was out there. No cover, no noise, just me standing in an open space watching something I couldn't explain. I decided I'd seen enough. I reached for the door handle. Right as my fingers touched it, the light changed one more time. It was closer now, not by a lot, but enough that it felt different. Like the distance between us had shortened in a way I hadn't seen it do before. I froze. My hand still on the door, the light held that position. For a second, 2 seconds, then it went out. Instantly, no dimming, no fading, just gone. The field went completely black, darker than it had been before, like something had been removed, not just turned off. I stood there, staring at the spot where it had been, waiting for it to come back. Nothing, no afterimage, no glow, just empty darkness. I listened. There were no sounds from the field, no wind, no insects, just the faint hum of my car engine behind me. I opened the door quickly and got inside, closed it harder than I meant to. The interior felt smaller, safer. I locked the doors out of habit, even though it didn't make much sense. I looked back out at the field through the window. Still nothing, just black. The sky was starting to lighten now, a faint gray-blue creeping in from the horizon. I started the car fully, shifted into drive, pulled back onto the road. As I drove away, I checked the mirror. The field disappeared behind me. No light, no movement, just empty land. But the way it had moved, not moved, just appeared in different places, and then gone the moment I stopped, stuck with me the whole drive home, like it had only ever been there while I was in motion. And the second I stepped out of that, it didn't need to be visible anymore. I noticed it because something felt off before I even looked up. I was sitting on my back porch, maybe around midnight. It had been a long day, nothing special, just work and errands, and I was trying to wind down before going to bed. My name's Caleb Turner. I live in a small neighborhood on the edge of town where the houses are spaced out just enough that you can actually see the sky clearly at night. It was one of those dry, clear nights. No clouds at all. You could see a ridiculous number of stars. I had a glass of water sitting on the railing and my phone next to it, screen dark. I wasn't really doing anything, just sitting there, listening to the usual background noise. Distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere, insects in the grass. Then all of that seemed to dip for a second. Not completely gone, just quieter. Like someone had turned the volume down slightly. I didn't think much of it at first. I just leaned back in the chair and stretched my legs out, looking up at the sky. That's when I noticed something missing. At first, I thought it was my eyes adjusting. There was a patch directly overhead where the stars just weren't there. Not dim, not obscured by clouds, just gone. The shape of it was what caught me. It wasn't random. It was clean, a perfect circle. I sat up a little straighter, squinting. The rest of the sky was packed with stars, but this one area was completely empty, like someone had cut a hole out of it. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Clouds don't look like that. Even thin ones have texture. This was just absence, a clean edge. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. The circle didn't stay still. It was moving, slowly, very slowly, drifting across the sky. As it moved, the stars behind it reappeared. Not gradually, they just came back, like they'd been switched on. I felt that first real sense of unease settle in. I looked around the rest of the sky again, trying to find anything that matched it. There was nothing. No second shape, no distortion around it. Just that one circular area moving overhead. I picked up my phone without taking my eyes off it, opened the camera, pointed it up. The screen showed the stars, but the dark circle didn't come through clearly. It just looked like a slightly dimmer patch, not the sharp, defined edge I was seeing with my eyes. I lowered the phone, looked back up, still there, still moving. I checked the horizon, no lights, no aircraft, nothing that could explain something that size being overhead without any sound, because that's what started to really sink in. The scale, it was huge. The circle wasn't small, it covered a big chunk of sky. Big enough that wherever it was, it had to be either incredibly large or much closer than it should be. And there was no sound at all, no engine noise, no wind displacement, nothing. I became aware of how quiet everything was again. The insects had stopped, the distant traffic noise was gone. Even the dog from earlier wasn't barking anymore. I stood up slowly from the chair, didn't take my eyes off it. The circle kept drifting. Same speed, same direction, no change. As it moved, it uncovered more stars behind it, leaving the sky looking normal in its wake. I took a few steps out into the yard, away from the porch light. The darkness felt deeper out there. I tilted my head back further, trying to follow it as it passed overhead. For a moment, I thought I could see something at the edge of it. Not a shape, just a slight distortion, like heat rising off asphalt, but subtle, barely there. Then it was gone. The edge stayed clean again. I swallowed, realizing my throat had gone dry. I looked down for a second, just to break eye contact. The ground looked normal. Grass, fence line, the faint outline of my neighbor's house. I looked back up. The circle had moved farther across the sky now, still steady, still silent. I tried to listen for anything. Anything at all. There was nothing. Not even the faintest hum. Just that heavy, quiet stillness. I took another step forward.